Wendy Donovan and the mayor,
Aaron Bowden, the CAO.
Mike Butler,
counselor, if he had his hat on.
counselor, by my house.
Jody McKay, council.
Counselor. And maybe if we start, sir, at the my far right. Nice to meet you.
I'm Janelle B.
Okay, George, do you not want to introduce yourself? Thank you. And behind you.
Good afternoon, my name is Paul Pittman, also a district advisory seal for the RCP, and used to be a Wolfville town police officer.
Way to go. I think that Ian, you're the, unless there's someone behind Danielle. Nice to meet you. Devin.
David Hopkins, manager of IT.
Okay. And Travis, maybe we'll start with you. And
Travis Thomas. Dave Brookham, I'm a strategic planning business analyst. And I'm Ed Nugent, staff sergeant at RCP.
all right. Somebody who wants to and is not me, take it away.
There you go, just so that anyone that's online.
Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, my name is Dave. I am a strategic planning analyst with the RCMP. I am a trained GDPRM analyst, and I am the one that completed a GDPRM on Wolfville this year. The reason why I'm here today is to give a brief overview of how a GDPRM essentially works and what kind of information you're going to see and what you're going to get out of a GDPRM. And then once I go through a brief overview of how a GDPRM works, then Ed and Travis will actually go through Wolfville specific data. So if any questions come up, feel free to just kind of give me a nod and ask a question. Otherwise, I'll answer any questions at the end of kind of how the GDPRM works. But yeah, so it's a GDPRM. It's the General Duty Police Resourcing Methodology. And the very first slide, because once I say that, usually my first question is, what is the GDPRM? So that is my very first slide. What is the GDPRM? Ironically, it doesn't spell it the acronym. The GDPRM is a tool that was created by the RCMP that allows a trained user to perform simulations that can be used to simulate day-to-day operations in a detachment and determine the general duty resourcing needs at the detachment. It's important to note that the GDPRM is not an audit function, so we're not taking a GDPRM, we're not going into a detachment because something's wrong. So it's not meant to go in and find errors, it's meant to go in and find and suggest efficiencies. GDPRM is not a staffing function, so although we will use it to help us determine the correct resource levels, there are a lot more things than just the GDPRM that will determine the amount of staffing that's needed in a detachment. GDPRM is one of many tools, I can't see my screen, that is used to estimate general duty resourcing needs. How does the GDPRM work? That's why I'm here today. The GDPRM, it uses data from our RCMP systems and it simulates general duty resourcing needs within a detachment during any given time period. Simulations that are done use actual data for the detachment being reviewed. So when I'm doing a Wolfville GDPRM, it means I'm taking occurrences that have happened in the town of Wolfville. I'm taking information from the members that work in the town of Wolfville. So it's using actual data for the detachment during the review. GDPRM simulations will include all components of general duty workload. So that includes initial investigation, follow-up, court, disposition, and administrative time. So all 5 of those pieces that form a general duty member's workload, the GDPRM will take all of those things into consideration. When we speak about the GDPRM, there's really 2 terms that are probably new that you may have never heard about before, but they're important terms to understand what they mean. So the first term we're going to talk about is proactive time. And proactive, I very much appreciate that. I thought that's fine. Top's fine. I thought I'd been hacked. So the first term, proactive time. So proactive time correlates, when we talk about proactive time, what we're talking about is the time between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. that's available to a general duty member for activities that are not related to responding to calls for service or administrative duties during the member's shift. So a general duty member's primary responsibility is to respond to calls for service or requests for service from the public. They also have administrative duties. Proactive time is basically how much time's left over once that work is done. It may include foot and vehicle patrols, reacting to offenses observed while on patrol, attending or participating in community events, or even just taking a 5-minute mental health break after a tough call. It's those minutes that member gets in between all of their other duties. Proactive time is the best opportunity for a member to increase community engagement while also increasing police presence in communities. PRMSU, they're the national team in our national headquarters that oversees the GDPRM. They have done time studies and they have a suggested benchmark minimum average of 35% proactive time. So this means that between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m., it's recommended that 35% of a general duty member's time be available for proactive duties. The reason why 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. is it's hard to do a community engagement at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's hard to attend a pancake breakfast or a basketball game at 4 in the morning or 11 o'clock at night. So proactive time is really those hours between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. Proactive time is measured in minutes in between workload activities, and it does not necessarily represent consecutive minutes. So at first thought, 35% seems like a lot, but you got to realize that there might be 5 minutes in between a call or 3 minutes in between a call or 6 minutes in between a call. That all goes towards proactive time. So it's not just when we say 35%, it doesn't mean they have hours and hours where they're sitting around doing nothing, because it could be just 2 minutes here, 2 minutes here, 2 minutes here. As proactive availability decreases, policing can become reactive in nature as officers are responding from one call to another without proactive time in between. This can lead to reduced community visibility and increased officer burnout. So if an officer is just going from one call to another, to another, to another, your community is not going to see them, and that officer is going to burn out. Second term, percentage of calls responded to immediately. This one's a little more straightforward. It's the percentage of time the general duty first responders are immediately available to respond to priority calls for service. This is generally a good indicator of all overall workload levels at a detachment. So if a detachment has a priority response time of 95%, that means that 5% of the time when a priority call comes in, all of their resources are engaged, and that call either has to be queued or additional resources need to be brought in. There's 4 modules, there's 4 data streams that go into analyzing a GDPRM. We're going to quickly go through the 4 modules just so you guys have an understanding of what kind of information that we're using for these GDPRM reports. So the first one is it's the PROS module, or the Police Reporting and Occurrence System module. This will produce charts that can provide a visual representation of when occurrences are being reported. So this is kind of, this is a good visual. So this is occurrence counts. This is not Wolfville results. This is just a generic detachment, but it gives you kind of at a quick glance, you can see when your occurrences are being reported. So for this situation, you can quickly see, so 0 is midnight, 23 is 2300 hours or 11 p.m. So this detachment is the busiest between 8 a.m. and we'll say 4 p.m. And also does it by day of the week. So this detachment is the busiest on a Friday, the second busiest on a Monday, the third busiest on a Tuesday. So it's a quick way to reference and see when your occurrence counts are happening, when your calls for service are happening. It also does it by month of the year. So for this detachment, they're the busiest in July, and then second busiest in August, and then the third busiest in September. That's very common for most detachments, busier in the summer. Occurrence counts alone can't be used to determine the amount of general duty resources required in a detachment district or district, because not all occurrence types require the same amount of general duty workload. For example, on average, an assault occurrence would take more general duty workload to complete than a mischief occurrence. The PROS module will apply average workload in hours to occurrence types to identify top 10 occurrence counts versus top 10 occurrence workload for the detachment or district. So just because you have a high occurrence count doesn't necessarily mean you have a high workload. And just because you have a low occurrence count, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a low workload, because depending on the types of occurrences, it's going to change. This here basically shows what you're going to see here is the green to yellow bars. They represent average total hours, and then the blue bars represent average total counts. So for this example, you can see that the highest workload hours is mental health calls with 409 hours, and the average, and that represents 66 mental health occurrences. If you get down to the fourth line, you can see that mischief represents 114 occurrences, but only 180 hours. So you start to see how, depending on the types of calls for service that are coming in, it can affect the amount of workloads involved in the detachment. Those are real numbers, but they're not Wolfville's numbers. Yeah. So this presentation goes from council to council, and it kind of goes around. So again, this is just a general overview. Until Ed starts speaking, these are all just generic numbers.
But once I'm up, it's all specific.
All Wolfville. Second module that we use is the Computerized Integrated Information Dispatching System, or KIDS for short. This was what we used to analyze the travel times to calls for service by area for the detachment and district. So in the pros module, we're applying average weighted workloads, and that's a national average. So the national average for an assault file is the same. However, we can't apply a national travel average. So the KIDS module will actually go in and determine how long it's taking to travel to occurrences for the detachment. It uses data that's obtained from the RCMP dispatching system that's used by the general duty members and their dispatchers. It will provide reports on average travel times to calls for service by area and by priority level of the call for service. So we have 3 priority levels: priority 1, 2, and 3. Priority 1 is basically your most urgent response. So priority 1 is going to be an urgent and immediate lights and sirens response. Your priority 2s are going to be still urgent. There's still be an immediate lights and sirens response. However, the loss of life is either not there or it's at a reduced risk. And then priority 3 is essentially what we consider a routine response. Usually there's no lights and sirens. So when we're talking about the 3 levels of priority response, priority 1 is your urgent, priority 3 is your routine. Again, so in a district that might have more than one zone, it will show you what is your response time for priority 1s in each zone, in priority 2s in each zone, and priority 3s in each zone. Third module is the shift scheduling module. So now we know what the workload is. We know how much time it takes for the members to travel. Now what we're going to look at is basically how many members were there. This module will analyze the base schedule rotation of the general duty members at the detachment, and it's used to determine how many general duty members are available to respond to calls for service at any given time. It's also used to calculate the availability of necessary backup and assistance for the members. So as an example, because I know sometimes it can be hard to see if you've never lived with a shift schedule rotation before, but this is an example. So if me and my partner Tina, we're working 2-day shifts, 2 night shifts, followed by 4 days off. This is what the members work in Wolfville right now: 2 days, 2 nights, 4 days off. So me and my partner work 2 days, 2 nights, 4 days off. And then Ed and his partner Paul, they come in and they're working the exact same schedule, but they're staggered off by 2 days. So they work 2 days, 2 nights, then 4 days off. Danielle comes along. She's also working 2 days, 2 nights, 4 days off, staggered by 2. And then Travis and his partner come in. So it kind of paints that picture of, if we all working that same rotation schedule, it allows for that full coverage. So every day of the week, there's a day shift, a night shift, and then 2 teams that are on days off. Ed, what do you think of that schedule? Does it work?
On paper only.
Yeah. So schedule doesn't work because that schedule in theory would allow 24-hour coverage, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. What happens if somebody calls in sick, right? What happens if somebody's on vacation? What happens if somebody needs to go on a training course? What happens if somebody takes a holiday? All of those things need to be taken into consideration. So the last module is the General Duty Yearly Availability Model, or the GDYA module. General duty members work 2,087.4 hours per year. However, vacation, training, leave, and holidays, which are referred to as detractors, will remove time from that member's general duty yearly availability. So here's an example. GDYA module analyzes actual training and leave summaries for the members. So if they are available to work 2,087.4 hours a year, but their detractors are 500, which you think just statutory holidays alone are usually around 100 hours a year, right? And then usually a member will get 3 or 4 weeks of vacation. Like, that number starts to add up very quickly. So what the GDYA will figure out, and this is using actual detachment data, is out of all of the hours that the members are available, how many of those hours are removed for detractors. Once we've got all that data together, so we have the workload that comes from the pros module, that'll go into the simulation. We have the travel time that comes from the kids module. We have the scheduled general duty resources that come out of that shift scheduling module. And the last one we have is that of those availability detractors that come out of the GDYA. I will load all those into the simulation, and the simulation will start simulating. And what it's doing is it's simulating the day-to-day activities in the detachment or district. So it's looking at every 15-minute increment, for every day, for every week, for the entire 52 weeks of the year. What it's doing is it's simulating every week of the year plus the average week. When it's done, what it gives me is it gives me proactive time percentage, and it gives me priority response time percentage. And it does that for every week of the year. And it also gives it to me for the average week of the year. So remember, those are those two terms that we talked about. Those are the two important numbers that come out of a GDPRM. So after all the general duty workload is complete, what percentage of time is remaining between 8 and 10 that those members are able to perform proactive work? And then percentage of calls responded to. So what percentage of priority calls came in during a time when all members were immediately available to respond and they were not busy with other recurrences. Those are the two main results that we get from a GDPRM. Where the GDPRM shows so much value is in alternate GDPRM simulations. So once I put in all of the information, all the workload, the travel times, the shift schedules, the general duty yearly availability, what I can then do is I can then manipulate the data. So it allows me to simulate different scenarios. So I could increase the number of general duty resources that are available. So if Wolfville has 8, what would it look like if it went to 9? How does it affect proactive availability? And how does it affect percentage of calls responded to immediately? We can look at decreasing the number of members. So if it's 8, what would it look like if there was 7? We can change the availability coverage. So if it's 24 hours, what would a 20-hour model look like? What would an 18-hour model look like? The GDPRM allows us to look at that. Last thing, well, there's many other things, but one of the other options that we use predominantly is the changing the member schedule, which includes shift lengths and types. So if you're not running a 24-hour detachment and you're working a 20-hour model where the members go on call at 3 a.m., what would it look like if they didn't go on call till 5 a.m.? What would it look like if they went on call at 1 a.m.? And again, how is it going to affect that proactive time, and how is it going to affect those percentage of calls responded to immediately? If you have members that are on call and they're not immediately available at 5 o'clock in the morning, as some detachments do, their percentage of calls responded to immediately at that time is going to be 0. If a call comes in, there's nobody to respond. So their percentage of calls responded to when that call comes in is 0. You're going to see some charts in the GDPRM. We'll go through these quickly, but just so you know, so that proactive time, 35% is the recommended average. So if a detachment has 24 members and they're doing 36.1, I can run it again with 25 members and it'll show me the difference. So if 25 members for this detachment was 40.3, 26 members went to 43.2. So I can just change the number of members and it will show me how it affects proactive time. The other one I can look at is priority 1 response availability. So in an 18-hour model, this detachment has 90.76% priority 1 response availability. If they were to switch to a 20-hour model, it goes up to 96%. If they were to switch to a 24-hour, it would go up even higher. If we went less than 18, it would go lower. It's once all the information's into that GDPRM, it's really just simple math. Once all those simulations are completed, so I will load all of that data and I will run all the simulations. And then what comes out of that is I will create what we call a GDPRM report. So the reports are authored based on the results of the simulations, and this report will include the current model results along with any recommended changes. The reports are then reviewed internally by units within the RCMP for accuracy before being prepared for presentation to detachment commanders, Department of Justice, and Town Council. So it's not just my word. These reports will go through many levels of authorization before we get to the point where we are today, which is presenting in front of Town Council. Keep in mind, the GDPRM is one tool that can be used to help determine the appropriate levels of general duty resources in a detachment. Other factors must be taken into consideration before making any decisions to add or remove resources or make any other operational changes. That's it for a general overview. I know I just threw a lot of information at you. But if anybody has any questions about how the modules work, or if anything comes up as Ed and Travis go through their piece of this presentation on Wolfville specific data and how we kind of came to the numbers that we came to, I'm the one that ran the modules, so I'm very familiar with the data. I've been going through this Wolfville GDPRM. I started this in March. So I've been working on this. I don't want to say every day, but I've been working on this every week for the last 6 months. So if there's no immediate questions for me, I'm going to hand it over to Ed and he will go through Wolfville specific information. Do you want to switch seats maybe?
Maybe we'll move. Yeah, I can move to the center. Oops.
We can, yeah, we'll be able to give you, I may have to just go through and remove some notes that I put in there specifically for Ed and Travis. Sure. But the actual presentation, yeah, you should be able to get a copy of that, no problem. Yep.
So thank you, David, for once again creating a tough act for me to follow. So I'll start by saying thank you, Mayor Donovan, Deputy Mayor Madeira Voss, councilors, staff, everybody here for making the time to hear this. I think it's an important presentation, important opportunity for some discussion, and I thank everybody for making the time to be here today to hear it. And I've already invited Travis and Dave to jump in where they see fit and help, you know, get this information across to everybody. As you've seen already, there's going to be a fair bit of it, and David has downplayed his the amount of exposure he's had to this and the amount of work he's done on it. It's incredible how much knowledge he has about Wolfville and the police operations here. He's accrued over the months that he's been doing this. So he's a wealth of knowledge. So we'll use that today for sure. So bear with me as I make sure I've got this sorted out. Okay, so we're first going to talk about the GDPRM simulation results. So I've got a few things, and this is basically the idea here is to explain what else forms a review when we do a GDPRM report beyond the workload analysis and simulation. So this first column here are some things that go into it for the community. Obviously, all you folks here are much more familiar with your community than I am. I would say you might not be. You're certainly the most familiar, but David would give you a run for your money after the work he's done on this. But so we talk about geography, infrastructure, unique policing challenges, population trends, and historical crime statistics. And then we're also looking at contracts and establishments. So the current contract, which is the PPSA versus the MPSA, and I think probably everybody's familiar with that distinction. So I won't go in depth into that. And I should say, I meant to say at the beginning of this that David touched on it, but I think we have a fairly small group here. So feel free if because there's so much information, rather than have everybody have to wait till the end and go back. I think it's manageable that if you have a question, just, you know, put a hand up or just give me a look and I'll slow down and we'll talk about it as we go, if everyone's okay with that. So yeah, we also look at general duty structure, the supervisor structure, the district structure, which is applicable in this case, and additional resources available. So next, we're going to be looking at community profile and historical crime statistics. So this first line we're looking at here is all of these lines are going to be crime severity index, CSI. Basically boils down to how severe the calls for service or the crime is in a given area, you know, the violent crime versus property crime and things like that. So this blue line we're all looking at right now is Kings County as a whole. The community of Wolfville is too small to have its own CSI index, so we're using the index for Kings County as a whole, but Wolfville is roughly, you know, similar. It's close enough to be indicative of the situation in general. So
I think the benchmark, if I remember correctly, is 5,000. So you guys might start seeing Wolfville specific CSI data in the not too distant future.
So now we're looking at the Nova Scotia average or numbers, and so we're going to zoom in here in a minute because this is all fairly large scale stuff. So here we go. This is the zoom in now. So overall, the CSI in both Kings County and Nova Scotia in 2021 was lower than the average of the rest of Canada. In fact, Canada up there now, or no, that's Nova Scotia. So yes, they're both lower. So as you see by the lines here, Kings County historically had a little bit higher CSI than the rest of the province, but starting in 2020, we dipped below the provincial line there. Oh, so I'm just gonna go back.
Good question. On that, does that include your traffic? Like your highway patrols and stuff like accidents, stuff like that, is that?
It's, it wouldn't include traffic accidents, so the CSI data comes from criminal charges that were made in court. So typically, your average traffic accident wouldn't lead to criminal charges.
That's a lot of time. It could.
Yeah, and again, the CSI data isn't necessarily, it's more about how severe the crime is that's happening in the community. So a motor vehicle accident, they call a motor vehicle accident an accident for a reason. They don't call them motor vehicle on purposes, right? Typically, there's no criminal charges that come from a motor vehicle accident. So therefore, they wouldn't be reported in the CSI.
But we will get into some slides about the time that Wolfville members or Kings District members spend on things here. Yeah, that's coming soon. So the CSI shows an overall decreasing trend in Kings County over the past 5 years, with 2021 being the first year since 2017 that the CSI for Kings County was lower than for the rest of Nova Scotia. So now we're going to get into our, we call it an org chart, our officially our RCMP Kings District resourcing chart. So the organization chart for the district that I'm running currently. So the boxes highlighted in yellow are the resources that Wolfville pays for, essentially, is the easiest way to put that. So 8 constable positions and a sergeant position. But you'll see, obviously, from the rest of the grid there, that there's, you know, essentially there's a large number of positions in Kings that in many ways Wolfville gets the benefit of, essentially. That includes First Nations policing, school safety, resource officers, and general investigation, but it does not include support services like traffic, police dog services, forensic identification services, emergency response team, etc. So those resources are in our area here. They fall under the Southwest Nova district, so they are certainly available to Wolfville and to Kings County as a whole, but they don't fall under my district's administration. So anything else to touch on there?
So there's 73 positions on the Kings District resource chart or the Kings District board chart. So just kind of Wolfville has the 9 highlighted positions, but just keep in mind that it as part of the district model, at any point, if any of those 73 resources are needed in Wolfville, they're made available to Wolfville. So
we can make, you know, a large number of them available. I like to, it's maybe a little bit of a buzzword, but it's one that I'm fond of. I like to refer to it as surge capacity in an area. If I'm in a really isolated place, I only have, at least in a very short term, you know, in the very short term, I'll only have what resources I have on the ground in that isolated community, but we're not in that situation in Wolfville. We have the surge capacity of all of these members from the rest of Kings, that many of those can be pulled away to assist with a crisis in Wolfville. And that is, as a district commander, it's a very nice buffer to have. It's very nice to have that ability to know that if I get on the radio and start calling urgently for help, that I've got a whole bunch of, you know, uniformed and set up members, even in the terms of an hour or 2 for call outs for overtime, I can pull on a lot of resources, which is a luxury for me compared to my past postings. All right, so move on. So far, okay. So we're gonna move on to contracts and establishment. I'm going to keep going, and we're gonna look at the structure here. So the Wolfville, as I mentioned, pays for those, you know, the on paper establishment for Wolfville is those 8 constables and sergeant. So the sergeant position is used now as an operations NCO East for Kings. So that sergeant does oversee some duties outside of Wolfville specific. The 8 constables are deployed to Wolfville, you know, specifically, but sometimes are required for calls elsewhere. However, there's one of the great benefits, as I see it, of the district model is one of the benefits is if you see those 4 corporals there. So all of the 8 constables in Wolfville require a direct supervisor, and what we use for that is a corporal. So the 4 corporals for Kings East, they each supervise directly and spend a large percentage of their time on the supervision of 2 Wolfville constables each. So that's a great benefit. Like basically the way I think I described this, Aaron, in our our initial presentation to you. A watch or a team is sort of like the core family unit of our district. You know, those constables on the team report to the corporal, and that's their direct point of contact for everything from you know, annual assessments to individual file review to approving overtime requests to leave and things like that. That's their go-to person for everything. And so the benefit of having those 4 corporals available to supervise the 8 Wolfville constables is a great one. So generally, yes, of course you may.
Corporals only, but do they have other people that
Yeah.
they oversee? So they those 4, so these 8 plus others, I assume.
Yes, so Travis is one of those corporals. He was for a time, for a few months now, acting as our senior operations NCO, but he's back right now in his substantive position of a watch corporal. So you actually have a slightly smaller watch than the others.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so typically, the corporal for Kings East would supervise 5 constables out of New Minus, 2 constables out of Wolfville for 7 total.
yeah. And then we've got corporals in Kingston as well that supervise 4 each down there. Mhm. That's the basics. Any other points on that I think? Oh, yes, of course.
So if you were talking about like, sort of like your corporal. So if you have, who's your partner? They watch TV, this is my partner, I'm doing this. I'm sorry, it's a dumb question.
No, it's not at all. It's not at all. I'll explain that right now. So the 4 teams that we have for Kings East, which include, you know, 5 New Minus members and 2 Wolfville members. Remember when David had those examples up and there was 2 on each? Well, picture 7 on each. So those teams stay together throughout the schedule. So that was a simplified version. If you were to blow that up into Kings specific, you'd see Travis and, well, in his case, 6 instead of 7, but 6 constables, including 2 Wolfville constables, all doing that exact same block of 2 on, 2 off, or 2 days, 2 nights, 4 off. So it's just, yeah, that showing partners. So your partners are 6 instead of 1. Yeah. That cover it for everybody? Yeah.
Blocks of 7, just follow that rotation, but they all stay together.
So we have 4 teams, yeah, and each one follows that same rotation together. And so where you saw one team taking over nights from the other team, that there'll be watch. So Travis's is watch 2, watch 3 will start days as his watch is going on to nights. Yeah. Okay. And obviously there can be some minor changes in that, but that's the way the base schedule rotation works. And the corporals all maintain the schedule here, and it's an interesting animal when you get into that many positions, but yeah, it works. So now we're going to talk about workload analysis and occurrences by. The first one here is occurrences by hour of day and day of week. So now we are looking at Wolfville specific numbers. These are Wolfville's results now from here on out. So everything you see here is real world. This is 21 and 2022.
This is 2022.
2022 specific. Okay. So we show calls for service count by hour of day and day of week for Wolfville 2022. So he showed a similar chart previously. And we have a total of 1,491 files on there, which may not match exactly with the reporting numbers provided to town council previously. That's because David went through basically, he modestly says not every file, but I strongly suspect every single file to make sure,
For Kings District, not just for Wolf.
which is thousands and thousands.
It was 8,076, not that I'm counting.
He
Not that I
went
was
through all of them to make sure that what the computer shows as a Wolfville file really was a Wolfville file and vice versa. That the addresses, he actually went into the reports to make sure that the dispatch address ended up matching with what the members actually went to that day and where they were. So all of these 1,491 files have been personally hand selected to and hand, he personally ensured that all of them are accurate to Wolfville.
The main reason why the number, so when you see 1491, you may have gotten reports of last year's occurrences that might be slightly different. Part of what I do for GDPRM is I'm making sure that I'm only counting workload that's actually done by general duty members. So when you guys have gotten previous reports about the amount of occurrences that are happening, it may have included things like traffic service files. So I'm removing traffic services because it's not part of general duty workload. It's still workload, but it's not specific to general duty in Wolfville. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're looking at that 1491 going, I'm pretty sure they said we had like 1,900 last year. So
These are the real nuts and bolts files that police officers dealt with. Yeah, rather than things that were just kind of, some might have been, like would have been additional files that might have been included in the first instance that didn't require a policing response, but these all did.
You're including the parking violation.
absolutely.
Absolutely. If somebody wearing clothes like this dealt with it, it's included in here. Yeah. Yeah. So I suspect that there are some people here who have noted the difference between the colors in this chart and the colors in the example for the average sort of place that he mentioned before.
So this really gives you a good idea, a good picture of when occurrences are being reported in Wolfville. So again, this isn't necessarily when the workload is, but this is when occurrences are being reported. So your busiest times at a glance start around 1 p.m. They kind of peter off a little bit after supper, and then it starts to ramp back up around 2200 or 10 p.m. 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m. That's when Wolfville is the busiest when it comes to occurrence counting.
So the average that was shown earlier, the daytime working hours are the busiest, but not the case here. So I'll just move on to the next one here. Now, this one got a few chuckles when we presented to the smaller audience previously. It shows the busiest months and days of the week of the year, and everywhere basically the standard. Yeah, exactly. You can see it there. The average town in Canada is busiest in the summer, and I can tell you, I came from Richmond County before here. Our call volume picked up. You could feel when the summer sun came on, you knew we were going to get busier. This is the complete opposite in Wolfville.
So you can almost correspond these busier months. You look at like September, we have an influx of new students and population in the community. October is highlighted in red there, and that's homecoming. We deal with a lot around homecoming, and then we have March, and then we kind of narrow that down to is G Cup around then as well. So the picture we're kind of painting is that this is typical to a university town and gown type of statistic breakdown, where in Wolfville our busiest times are on the weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. And then specific to months of the year are the big events surrounding campus. So it's usually around holidays.
And as a frontline supervisor, Travis has lived this, for the last since he's been here. But I personally experienced it the last couple of weekends. We had some overtime resources. Then we had an operations plan for Welcome Week, and he and I were out Saturday night, and we saw that, September is not the beginning of the slowdown in Wolfville as it is in many places. Friday, Saturday night there was quite busy. We had 4 overtime resources, including me, lined up until midnight, and he and I made the operational decision around 11:30 or so that we weren't going to be able to go home at midnight because the bars were going to let out at 1, and there were hundreds of alcohol consuming younger folks downtown, and spilling out. So definitely a different scenario than many communities are looking at. Any other points to hit on that before we move on? Okay,
Great.
I think I've lost my place here, but we're gonna. Okay, so now we're looking at some, pardon me?
I just have a question. The thing that the hearing mirror today.
I would, anecdotally, I would think so, but David probably can tell you.
It's, I haven't done a GDPRM for Antigonish, so I can't speak to what their results would look like, but I would imagine it would look very similar.
I think you'd be looking at a pretty similar idea. I think.
It's not, there aren't usually surprises when you do a GDPRM, so I expected when I did Wolfville that they would be the busiest on Fridays and Saturdays, and they would be the busiest in September, October, and they were. And I've done GDPRMs on other counties, other municipalities, and I would, you know, expect them to be busiest during the summers, and they usually were. And I did one where I did one specifically where I didn't think there was going to be a huge spike even in the summer, and sure enough, when I ran the results, it was pretty much flat the whole year. So there's a little bit of a pickup in the summer just because people are outside and not inside, but yeah, usually you can kind of anticipate what the results are going to look like based on the demographics of the town before you put any numbers into the system.
So we've touched on this stuff before. Sorry, I should clarify. Is everybody good? No more questions on that? Okay, so we touched on this in David's piece, but now we're looking at Wolfville specific numbers again. So it might look a little bit daunting at first, but it is fairly straightforward stuff. So it shows that the types of files that we respond to the most, like that are the most reported, they're not always the main drivers of workload. They're not the things that we necessarily the things that we spend the most of our time, the most police time on. So for example, parking offenses are the number one by occurrence count, 193 of them. This is 2022 as well. Yeah. But they're actually number 6 by weighted workload. So the amount of time that these weighted workload numbers are a national average, but they're roughly equivalent to what we would use here, what we would need here. But mental health acts are number 4 by occurrence count, but they actually work out, as you can see, by quite a wide margin as the thing we spend our most time on. And that just to give a basic idea for those not in a policing lifestyle, they are very high workload files because often we try to respond with 2 for those. They can be, you know, people experiencing a mental health crisis, you know, the situation it can be volatile, or there's a lot of unknowns. So we generally have to respond with more than one member, or often do. And next, there are a lot of issues. Basically, there's a lot of downtime because police officers often have to take the person for medical assessment, take them to the hospital, and as I don't think it will come as a surprise to any that sometimes we encounter lengthy wait periods while we help these people safely get care. So that's the big reason. So there's some other things there, like assault, for example, is certainly, I don't even think it makes the chart by top. It doesn't even make the top 10 by number of calls, but it ends up as the thing we spend the second highest amount of our time on, because assault files are more complicated and they take a lot of time to wend their way through, and a lot of police officer time to get a package to the court, you know, for a charge, and then there's often court appearance time and things like that.
Yeah, so just keep in mind that general duty workload includes initial investigation, follow-up, court, disposition, and min duties. So a parking offense, you're going to have an initial response. You're probably not going to have a lot of follow-up. You're going to have a minimal amount of court time. And even with a mental health file, you're going to have an initial response. But usually once we put the person into a doctor's care, there's not a lot of follow-up or court or disposition. But when it comes to an assault file, you're going to have a 2-member initial investigation, probably a 1-member follow-up. You're probably going to have court and disposition and a lot of admin duties. So
one way to look at it is that I don't expect my people to call to make a call back to everyone they give a parking ticket to see how they're doing. But I do expect them to check in with unfortunately, with a victim of assault, or, you know, sexual assault, or these persons' crimes. I do expect them to keep that person apprised of what's going on with the court process, and that takes time and things like that. So that's why we're looking at that. Any questions about these or comments in general about the numbers? Okay, yes, I can see them better here. So the top 10 by occurrence count are parking offenses, mischief, so that is a bit of a broad category. That is anything from vandalism, so breaking, you know, beating up a park bench, to obstructing enjoyment of property, which we often use if somebody calls and says, I had a little party and somebody got too drunk and now they won't leave my house. We'll go and we'll sometimes use that as the scoring, if you will, of the file to go and deal with that person. So, mischief is number 2, municipal bylaws, is number 3, mental health act, number 4, other non-moving provincial, or on other non-moving traffic. So that's, traffic tickets that aren't like speed or things like that. So seat belts, what else is under non-moving? Failure to register your vehicle or renew your registration or not having insurance, those sort of things. Liquor Act, so that's basically drunk in public. Disturbing the peace or causing disturbance, which is sort of used in similar circumstances to that. It's generally fighting, being intoxicated in public, that sort of thing. Crime prevention, another, is number 8 there. Number 9 is suspicious person, vehicle, or property. And number 10 is a well-being check. So well-being checks are essentially, I haven't seen my neighbor in a few days and I'm worried about her. Can you go check? That sort of thing. Or generally, I think that's the general idea of a well-being check. And then, so conversely, the top 10 by weighted workload rather than the number of reports. We start with mental health act, then assault, then sexual assault. Both of those number 2 and number 3 didn't make the top 10 at all, as we mentioned. Then mischief, then liquor act, then parking offenses, then disturbing the peace, then criminal harassment, then operation while impaired, so impaired driving, and lastly, fraud. So frauds can be complex files as well, especially those that make it to court and things like that. They're certainly very complex investigations. I'm sorry?
When you talk about fraud, it says
Less than or equal to 5,000.
Yeah.
So the criminal code delineates the severity of a theft or a fraud at that $5,000 mark. It used to be $1,000 until the 90s, I want to say, and then the courts decided that $1,000, due to inflation, wasn't the correct line anymore, so they changed it to 5,000. So basically, the courts consider a theft of less than $5,000 to be not as serious as a theft over $5,000. Now that. Yeah, the theft over 5,000 or fraud over 5,000. Yeah, we don't use it like we don't have the same kind of phrasing or terminology that some of the states use or that the United States uses. Like they'll talk with them. There's still a range within both the judges can use or work within, but yes, there's that one basic line now. 5,000, above 5,000, that's a very large range. You could be talking $5,001 or millions of dollars of that, but they do delineate them there. For court purposes. Yes. Yeah. So that, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No,
It sounded like you had
So crime prevention is, especially when it comes to a GDPRM perspective, it captures a lot of workloads done by members that doesn't necessarily lead to charges. The one that you would see predominantly in crime prevention would be something like a keep the peace file. So if a boyfriend and girlfriend break up, the girlfriend wants to get her stuff back, but she doesn't feel safe going to the apartment by herself, she'll call and say like, hey, can you come with me while I come and gather my belongings? Technically, no crime has occurred. We're not laying a charge. We are just going to essentially prevent crime, because if we don't go, then there could be an escalation of violence. There are a few other things that I've seen in crime prevention, but predominantly I would say crime prevention is that exact thing. It's where a member's attendance is required, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a criminal charge.
Another example could be a curfew check, an offender who has been ordered by the court to do either a 24-hour house arrest or a curfew removed in residence in a certain time of the day. That's just us going and checking on them to make sure that they're where they're supposed to be.
Nicely done. Yes, thank you. Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
In terms of how you calculate, for example, the file, is that simply a complaint or is it an actual offense that leads to charge?
It's any occurrence that happens in our police reporting occurrence system. So it would include any complaint in whether it led to a charge or not. Because ultimately there's a requirement of workload for the general duty member once they receive the complaint. Even if it doesn't lead to a charge, it's still going to count it as a call for service, and it's going to apply those hours. And it's important when we talk about weighted workload that you realize it's an average weighted workload. So yes, there will be times where we are responding to something and it might only take an hour, and this will apply 5 hours. But there's also times where we go and it might take 10 hours and it's only going to apply 5 hours. So it's a national average that's determined by a team in our national headquarters. And it's reviewed extensively to come up with a national average. If we started getting into how much time did it actually take, it would become unfeasible to manage.
And correct me if I'm wrong, David, I don't think I am though. I think these numbers came from that same pool that I described earlier. So a traffic ticket written in Wolfville by the provincial traffic unit would not be reflected in these numbers. This is just that were done by general duty. Correct?
It depends on how. So if it was a traffic complaint that came in from a call for service. So if
Yes,
somebody
okay.
called and said there's somebody speeding on the highway and we responded to it, then that would be included as general duty workload. If it's a traffic member who is sitting on the highway with his radar, he's proactively trying to catch people speeding, that would not be considered general duty workload.
But a GD member sitting on the highway proactively would, no, it's not, it's not caught. Okay, all right.
I just wanted to clarify what you're doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but this is based on first line support, right? So an occurrence, let's say that's an assault, a theft, and your driver might only count as an assault. Sometimes it's maybe more complex than.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the UCR reporting or the uniform crime reporting, there's the most serious offense is always reported first, and that's what this is based off of. So to Danielle's point, you might have an assault that also involves a fraud, but it's going to be coded primarily as an assault and secondary as a fraud. So they can definitely become more complicated.
There's one question that if you have 4 parties going on at the same time, and arguably each one of those parties might spot like the party. Unless there's a complaint, that there's no number generated off.
It likely wouldn't be counted.
The members, that's correct. The members have the ability to self-generate their own files as well. So if there was no complaint from the public, but the members were in attendance, it's very likely that the member would generate their own occurrence.
And a good example of that, George, is last weekend I went to a party on Westwood, and while I was at that, I created 3 liquor offense files for different people that I was speaking with at that time. So it's like the one that I was dispatched to was also generated 3.
So those numbers might not be captured in these specific graphs or charts. It doesn't mean that we're not capturing them.
I think that one of the frustrations with the public. Their reaction to the public. Particularly in bylaws. Whether you look at the goal. I think there's a reluctance.
Fair enough. And our reporting systems give us the flexibility to fairly easily create files when we come across them. And so yeah, and we encourage our members to, we ensure that our members, create a file to document what they're dealing with, document their the use of their time. So that is captured and it is monitored for sure. We maybe wait for there. We'll carry on. Yes.
So say that a police officer pulls you over to your speed, and then they go to your car and you have firearms and you're kidnapped. You never charge for a speeding ticket? I'm just.
No, we just, no, that's not what that means.
So
No, I'm sorry. That, what we meant there when we were talking about the first line of scoring, that's just our internal documentation of what's dealt with. So when he was looking at these numbers for workload, like he just, for the purposes of creating the graph, he just went with the most serious thing that was reported. It doesn't mean that we didn't deal with all those other things. When we report to the country, when we report to StatsCan essentially, right, with the UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting, we have multiple lines where we can show what we dealt with on that file, but the most serious thing we dealt with automatically filters to the top essentially. So that's all he looked at for these graphs, but we document and deal with the other offenses that are there too. Oh, 100%. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Some members look forward to it.
Yeah. In British Columbia, we had 3 boxes on a ticket and we called it bingo if we got all 3. I'm kidding, but in Nova Scotia, we have, it's all digital ticketing now, and we can do all kinds of ones. And if we, just because I pull you over for speeding, if I see a pound of cocaine in your car, doesn't mean I'm not gonna deal with that. Yeah, no, just means that the cocaine will filter to the top of our reporting internally. We'll still have a scoring for, we'll still report that we gave you a ticket for speeding. We'll still give you the ticket for speeding too,
And the UCR is not, it's not just RCMP. The UCR is used across North America. At one point, I don't think it was for Wolfville, but at one point I was digging into UCR a little bit and I was reading a report from Kansas City. Like it's used in the US. It's a pretty standardized system that's used across North America.
Yeah, it's existed long before my service in the RCMP, and it's been established for quite a long time. Okay, I think we're all wrapped up with this one.
So the biggest takeaway from these charts is that your occurrence types that are being reported aren't necessarily your drivers or your workload. So mental health at 539. So 539 mental health calls, or sorry, 87 mental health calls represented 539 weighted workload hours. And then if you compare that to parking offenses with 193, so you've got almost 4 times as much mental health, or I guess 3 times as much mental health with half of the amount of calls.
Takes less than an hour to deal with a parking ticket, deals multiple hours to deal with somebody in a mental health crisis. Maybe.
Obviously, it's a different skill set in terms of your training to be by an organization. Must have changed, and things that I'm reading in the paper, mental health is not something years ago you agree about much as you did right now. So in terms of the training and obviously the crime trace with the numbers that must be important.
We won't be speaking directly or specifically to, the training and that sort of thing going forward, but I think, David, that's probably fair to say that it is maybe resulted or represented a little bit with the GDPRM, the downtime sort of thing has likely changed a little bit over years. Training has, in my 16 plus years with the Mounties now, and some folks in the room with more service, I'm sure they've seen an even more drastic change, but training definitely takes up more of our time than it used to. And we certainly receive more training in some of these things now. Yeah. The mental health response is probably arguably the biggest thing I've seen change. We didn't talk much about crisis, management when I first got in the RCMP, and now it's a principal focus of our training for us. We train specifically about how to deal with, to help somebody in crisis, and how to de-escalate. Crisis intervention and de-escalation, CID training that didn't exist when I got in the RCMP, and now it's a fundamental part of our training. So yeah, there's certainly a lot more in-house once a member joins the RCMP. There's a large commitment annually for recertification and training and things like that, and that has, I think it's fair to say that's increased significantly over my service and over yours, Paul. Yeah.
And a lot of these are brought down by the Department of Justice in mandatory training. I worked with both the. Safe to say now that the increase in forces that we have to do that for, or cover off the different challenges that we have in police with the exchange and marker that I've been, it's changed a lot. When it comes to mental health calls, you're talking about under the involuntary psychiatric treatment, which is something that we have to follow. When we pick somebody up on a mental health during a crisis, we take them to the hospital. We can't just leave them there. Once upon a time, we used to be able to, they had a secure room there, and go back with them. Now when we go there, there's a chance we could be sitting there for 6 hours, because we cannot be released from that call until they've been seen by a doctor and been assessed. The challenges that we face from outside agencies not having the ability to deal with things on their side of the fence, a trickle down, really does eat up a lot of work that we used to have to do other things.
Very well put, thank you.
Yep.
Very well put.
And when you have your team of 7 people, does everybody have a specialty or everybody trains? I mean, everyone has the same base training, but do you have different skill sets and different, like, you combine your teams like that?
Yes, and we actually specifically try to specifically manage our resources based around some of the training the specialized training that people have. I was meant to mention, Paul, Ryan, I think the mandatory training list that all uniformed RCMP members need to complete now must be getting close to or past 50 different courses, I think, are on that mandatory list, many of which require annual recertification. And yes, many of us have very specialized training. We have quite a few members that are breath techs, we call them qualified technicians to operate breath testing instruments, for example, and that each of us, I'm one of them, and we have an annual requirement to do a recertification course, for example, and we try to spread those breath techs out. Some are collision analysts, and we try to spread those out, and that requires a great deal. And some detachments have emergency response team members, things like this. Some of those commitments are much bigger than others, but yes, we do try to spread those out amongst all the teams. Anything to add to that? Okay.
Just because we're at a big university, I just want to, maybe have the same wellness checks, and they do them, and if they don't, do they contact the RCMP on that? Or is it mostly individual homes that receive on a wellness check? Because sometimes it's some considered some suicidal, so it's not just an elderly person who's fallen. So what's
On campus, there would be a protocol through our student services staff and safety and security staff who would be doing the wellness checks on this. And often there's some people called the systematic provider. We have a protocol on campus to do that for our on-campus resident students.
And sometimes we'll also be called to assist other agencies with checks on folks, like if the paramedics, for example, EHS goes to somebody's residence and can't get in because they're, incapacitated. There's nobody in the residence able to open a door. We'll be called to assist with that. So that sort of thing, and we'll attend and force entry sort of thing, because we're the ones equipped to do that. So, any other points on that, Chance? Okay. All right. So we're going to look at average travel time by priority. And I will admit that David had to set me straight. We had a little preparation session before we came over. So I've got it all straight now in my head about what this looks like. So we have those same priorities that David discussed earlier: priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. Priority 1 being those biggest emergencies. We know somebody's life is in danger if and we have to get there immediately. Level 2 is we think that they probably, the way I kind of view it is we think that somebody's life could or maybe is in danger, so we still go lights and sirens, but we don't necessarily know that somebody's at immediate risk of life, life and death risk. Priority 3 is the standard files, the thefts or assaults or the things where, parties are separated and we're not as concerned for somebody's immediate well-being. So the numbers are quite close together, but these are average travel times. So that is, as David educated me, that's the average of all the members, all the general duty members that responded to that call. So easy, kind of a simple way to look at it in my mind is that probably the first 1 or 2 police officers to go to an emergency priority 1 call are gonna go there as fast as they can make a police car go. The second, the third or fourth members, so for example, we get a call on the other end of Wolfville right now. Travis and I are the first 2 to go. We go tearing out of here, all we can make it go, because we know somebody's life's in danger, or we believe it is. We get there, we establish that that the person is now safe. We've either made them safe or we found out that they weren't in danger to begin with. We get on the radio, we tell everybody else we still need some help, but we're gonna tell all those people that are coming behind us, slow it down. Because we don't want somebody to walk out of Patty's Pub and meet a police car the bad way. You know what I mean? We don't want them to go screaming, the third and fourth people coming to go screaming through Wolfville when we've already established that there's no longer a priority. So that's kind of the basics here. So these numbers, that's an average of all the general duty members that respond to a call, right?
That's correct, yeah, so there is an error I did notice earlier on the slide, so it says Wolfville 2022, but the kids module actually uses 2 years worth of data, so this is 2021 and 2022. I don't remember the exact number, but I would imagine it would be somewhere around 15 or 16,000 trips that the kids module would have assessed. And what Ed was saying there was, especially when it comes to priority 1s, the closest member is gonna respond, but you're gonna have other members responding from other areas. So that's why those numbers tend to kind of average out together, because on a priority 3 file, where it's no lights and sirens, it's just gonna be 1 member going. And it's might still be the closest one, but they're probably not gonna put their lights on. If they're going down Main Street in Wolfville, they're gonna wait at the stop sign with everybody else. Whereas if it's a priority 1, you might have 1 member there in 3 minutes and a second member there in 3 minutes, but then the third and fourth member get there in 10 minutes, while your average is gonna be 7 minutes. So these numbers always come out a little bit more close than I think you would expect to see them, but just keep in mind that it's all of the trips associated, not just 1 trip.
I was initially a little bit surprised that they were so close together, but then as explained, I understood that that doesn't mean in the red category, that doesn't mean that the first 2 police officers didn't get there, or first 1 didn't get there much faster than that. Go ahead.
So the way I would assume those numbers mean is that nuisance call on a busy Friday night that takes 90 minutes to be answered is a real anomaly.
Yes, absolutely. I think, yeah, for us. So now we're looking at travel time here. This is not response time though, correct, David? There's 2 different things. This is how long it takes us to drive to something once we're in the police car and going. So, yeah, not necessarily indicative of those. Yeah.
Clearly.
There's the distinction there. Yeah, this is travel time.
And keep in mind, when the kids module is looking at travel times, it's determining the amount of workload that's required for the file. So if the members are tied up with a higher priority file and a new call comes in, they still have to take it. So that response time for a mischief complaint might be delayed if the members are tied up on a higher priority file. But from a workload perspective, when it comes to that specific complaint, it's the actual travel time that we're looking at, not the response time.
If while a nuisance bylaw file obviously is given importance, if an assault comes in at the same time, we're gonna have to prioritize the assault or something. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this? All right. So now we're gonna look at some serious results of the algorithm or the computation that David was talking about earlier. Is that an accurate way to put it?
The GDPRM simulation.
Yeah. So once all those numbers go in, this is now we're looking at what it punches out. So this is our current model here. So we have those 8 constables that respond to files. So the detractor. So I need to talk about the detractor factor first. I think that's you coined that phrase, detractor factor. So these numbers consider a full availability. So the full 2,087.4 hours per year. And the reason we did that, the reason David did that, I can't take credit for. The reason he chose to use that is partly because of the district model and how it applies to Wolfville. So just essentially the simple way to look at it is just because Wolfville's members, the two members for Wolfville might not be working that shift. So say one has taken the day off, for example. So there's only one Wolfville member working. That doesn't mean that two members are not available to respond to a call in Wolfville, because we will just pull a new minus member to cover calls, cover that call for Wolfville, or may either attend as backup to the Wolfville member, or may actually take it themselves, and then the Wolfville member would either go if needed, or just respond to something else. So, you know, after having a look at the way we operate here, David, I think it's safe to say that you decided to go with this factor of two members, or the Wolfville members being available 100% of the time, because they're essentially backfilled, for want of a better term, from the Kings District pool.
Yes.
We'll never leave Wolfville hanging, because we have those other positions.
The GDPRM is looking at the amount of members that are available to respond. So Wolfville has two members that are associated with Wolfville, but they are part of the district model. So if the two members, are supposed to be there in Wolfville and one of them calls in sick, the amount of members that are available to respond to a call is still two members, because the call for service comes in and will be taken by a minus member. So when we're talking about that GDYA factor, where we lose availability because of sick time or vacations or training or anything like that, when we're talking about those two Wolfville members, there's no reduction, because if Travis goes on a training course, somebody's gonna backfill Travis from the district model. So it's just kind of important to, when we're talking about these first simulation results in this current model, is that GDYA factor, or that availability because of vacation and sick leave. Essentially, there's no detractor in Wolfville because of the district model.
And we will get into that a little more in depth here in a bit when we start talking about alternate models. Any questions? Yeah, I think we've covered all the
Yep.
talking points there with that stuff, so, okay. So, here we go. So the blue line down here is, right here is Wolfville's specific proactive availability. So that's that time during the daylight, you know, or the daytime hours, the times that you could go to a pancake breakfast or go for a foot patrol and people would be out on the street to see you, that kind of thing. These are Wolfville's numbers. The green line at the top is the availability for a priority one emergency response. So if a you know, worst case scenario file comes in, the members are not tied up with something else and available to go. That's another priority and available to go. It's 95.1% of the time. So that's great. And this is the weeks of the year are at the bottom there. So the percentages are at the top. So the proactive availability numbers are good for Wolfville. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but that's so 68% on average. Yes.
The average week. So you can see there's ebbs and flows, and I think if you put that January, February, March, if you put that chart side by side with this one, you would see there's dips in March and probably dips in September and dips in October, because as the members get busier, they're available less proactive.
Thinking that's St. Patty's Day right there. And yeah, that little dip, if you can see my pointer, see that where their availability goes down? Yeah. Yeah. And then you can see, you know, homecoming, that sort of thing over here. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is occurrences, but let me go ahead a bit here. Okay.
So sorry. I'm
Go
gonna
ahead.
jump
No,
on
yeah,
one
jump
second.
in.
So 68% proactive availability at face value is high. Yeah, so if you remember, the recommended minimum benchmark for proactive availability is 35%. So what Ed's gonna go through here is so when we say 68%, at face value, that seems very high. However, there's again, like, we can't take workload consideration at all, like, as the be all and end all. So there's a lot of other factors that go into the decision to make.
I'm gonna go right back there for you.
So,
No, they don't.
so in the interest of, I guess, trying to condense the presentation, you're looking at two results at once. So the proactive availability is that time between 8 and 10 PM that the members are available to respond or to do those proactive duties. The 95.1% has remember, the GDPRM is based on two results: proactive availability, priority one response availability. So my fault, I probably should have separated these two, because we're really talking about two different things. So proactive.
Close. 95% of the time, if a emergency comes in, we have those two members available to go to it.
At least one.
At least one member available to go to it. Sorry. Immediately, yeah.
This is fine now.
Oh, that's fine.
Was at our previous town. He was there, emergency comes in, he leaves the, Main Street event and goes to whatever the emergency call for that show.
Correct.
But barring an emergency, that can be down on Main Street, but the first priority is to call the
Really what that 95.1% represents is, so if 100 priority calls come in, how many of those 100 calls was there somebody immediately available to respond where the call either didn't have to be queued, or so let's say Travis is responding to a mischief complaint and he's there and he's taking pictures of a flower pot that was kicked over. And then a priority assault file comes in, an assault in progress. Well, Travis is going to leave that mischief file
So,
and go there. But from a GDPRM perspective, Travis wasn't available to immediately respond because he was already tied up with another file. So it's really, when a priority call comes in, is there a member available to respond, or do we have to queue it or reassign them for something else?
so, yeah. Just as another example, say there's two serious events going on nearby and all the police officers are tied up for a few minutes. They can't immediately get clear. That would fall into that 4.9% sort of thing where they're not immediately available. They have to sort of triage, they have to deal with the immediate emergency where they are before they can go to the next. But it's very,
And I do apologize. The reason why the chart looks like this is usually when I'm looking at these charts, I'm looking at multiple simulation results at once. So it's easier for me if I'm just looking at them both at the same time. So I apologize. I should have separated these two because we're really talking about two completely different things.
so the blue line, sorry, represents the amount of the percentage of time where during, what is it again?
8 a.m. to 10
8
p.m.
a.m. to 10 p.m. Where a police officer in Wolfville, at least one police officer in Wolfville is available, or sorry, the police officers assigned to Wolfville are available to go do something on their own time, something proactive, to go fly the flag sort of thing, go out and walk around and talk to people and say hi, or to go sit on the highway and look for an impaired driver or speeder. So that 68% is a little higher than normal, or like well above the average for, or the recommended minimum. However, we're gonna talk about that here in the oncoming slides about why Wolfville is a little bit unique there, or at least,
And I think just to touch on what Ed's saying here, I think what's important to look at with this graph is that we have very high response time for priority one calls within Wolfville. But within the district model as well, we also have a lot of proactive time to commit to doing foot patrols, talking to business owners, stopping in the schools and things like that. So it's, we're getting a lot of the best of both worlds here.
And how does that 60% correspond to the after hours? Because that's when most of your calls are here.
He's a slide ahead of you.
we're almost there. If I haven't answered it after the next slide or two, please remind me and we'll go back. Everybody's ready to move on? Okay, so here we are at the occurrences by hour, day, and day of week. So, as we discussed earlier, Wolfville is not, has different occurrence time statistics than the average sort of community. So this slide is going to show that proactive time is high because Wolfville has a high number of calls for service that fall outside of the core proactive hours. So I'm just going to click here and I'll show you. So those are those core proactive hours that we talked about, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. So that's that block in blue. So, proactive times appear to come back high because Wolfville members are responding to a higher than average percentage of their calls for service, 34%, outside of those core proactive hours of 8 to 10. So just kind of take note, if you will, of the numbers of in red and orange that are outside the time. So our police officers are just, essentially the way to look at it is, yes, they have proactive time during those peak hours, but it's balanced by them being much busier than the average community's officers would be after hours. So they're very busy, for example, on Sunday mornings, which is not, yeah, Saturday, yeah, essentially, but I'm looking at that.
Yeah.
You know, midnight to 1 o'clock. So yes, the fallout from Saturday night, you know, the carryover into the wee hours of Sunday morning, which is not, you know, the same as the average, or, you know, Friday at 1 o'clock in the morning, for example, which is very, you know, unusual in my experience to be busy after a Thursday night. That's not, you know, that's not really the norm in most places. So that's sort of an explanation of, you know, the part of the requirement for more resources in Wolfville than you would think, merited by that proactive availability. Because our mornings and early afternoons are sleepier essentially compared to the nights, which is not the norm. Yes.
It does give us the possibility to do things like increase the control, with more visibility, because there is that.
It does, absolutely. The only caveat I would add that is that those nighttime calls create work for the police officers during that, you know, that have to be complete, has to be completed during the daytime hours. There's spillover. If you take a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, there's going to be daylight work required, follow up, you know, court, things like that, that spill over into those peak proactive numbers. But yes, I in general, I'd agree that it gives some flexibility, but yeah, there's definitely fallout from being busy at midnight, because you're not going to be able to do a lot of the work that investigation requires until those peak proactive hours. Follow me? Mhm. Yeah. Yes.
To me, that would go off. Doesn't that count as the admin time that went into that call?
Sorry, David, you're the best one to talk to that.
Yeah.
No, yeah, and I'm just going back to the proactive, so we're at 60%, but you were saying spillovers that do not allow for this much flexibility, but wondering if that.
It would take it into account to a certain degree. I would say it would predominantly be putting that workload into when the occurrences came in. But again, it's the way the GDPRM works. It may not consider all of those hours to fall within the proactive hours. It is going to take it instead of now.
I think the simulation would count that hour, that number of hours at 7 o'clock, for example, when it came in, rather than.
It would take the initial investigation for sure.
Yeah.
Even when you take things like court disposition into consideration, like you can't even. It's not even going to happen in the same week. It's probably not even going to happen in the same month.
In some cases, it's months and months out.
Yeah.
You know, the court time, and that's always during the day, kind of thing. So you just have to kind of.
The predominant amount of workload would come from your initial investigation, which would be captured at the time of the reporting.
So with caveats though, we have healthy.
Yes. That is absolutely, yeah, in my opinion, valid, absolutely valid. Yes, we do have significant flexibility and quite a bit of breathing room essentially to increase or tweak our proactive work during those hours. Absolutely.
There's a couple other considerations taken, which Ed is going to touch on in some of the other slides that go into that as well. But, yeah.
68% is between 8 and 10.
This blue block.
And even though you may have, I get some spillover, do the admin work during that time. I mean, you've looked at the data enough.
Yep.
Would you have an educated guess as to say what that would be? I mean, if you work with the numbers that much, do you have an assimilation of what you think is actual?
Not by hour of the day, no. So I would see the amount of workload that's required for initial investigation, court follow-up, disposition, and administrative duties, but I wouldn't have visibility to when exactly that's.
No, so I'm just saying, with the you have a percentage, so right now it's saying 68%, even though
Yeah.
you're saying with the caveats,
Yeah.
it's probably not.
Yeah.
Do you have an educated guess what that percentage is? You look at it.
Yeah,
what percent-
I wouldn't want to venture a guess. Honestly, it's. I would be guessing based on my own opinion.
I think we're probably still pretty close to that.
to the-
I don't think it's a massive difference. I don't
You
think
get
it
it.
was. Yeah.
I mean, it's a lived experience. for
Yeah.
you, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
What's the 95? So 95% of the time.
Yeah.
But if we call 100 times, 95 of them, someone is going to be there in 7 minutes.
So the.
Yes, 6.
95% somebody's available to leave right away. So yeah, that probably is pretty accurate because they are gonna leave, like, yeah,
Yeah.
because our people are not gonna leave a priority one sitting if they believe, so.
All of these numbers though aren't priority ones.
Correct.
Okay.
Those are
So
just
we don't
strictly
have-
occurrence counts.
Okay, so we don't have what priority 1 is, or do we?
No.
I don't know what these numbers are,
No, those are just strictly occurrence counts.
and we don't have anywhere in this presentation of how many are priority 1s and how much of the rest.
Not in the GDPR, no. It's information that would probably be available.
And I think that's where the public, as a- if you looked at that without asking a question, you'd say 95% of someone will show up in 7 minutes. That's what it sounds like. when you would
It's
have
95% of
asked.
priority calls.
Yeah, priority one calls,
Yeah.
Yes.
not for, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
More charts. I love charts, so.
So
That's-
if your life, if your life is in danger, 95% of the time, we have somebody who's ready to go right now. Ready to be in their, jump in their police car and hit the road screaming immediately. And, yeah, well, I don't fall under those GD members, of course, but if I was one of your constables, yes, I'd be ready to roll. I could run out of here and run out screaming. However, 5% of the time, I'm at another serious incident that I can't immediately pull myself away from. Yeah, might be a couple minutes, shouldn't be any longer than that, but I can't just jump, I can't just walk away from whatever I'm doing and jump in my police car and go screaming to your aid. Yeah.
Right now, today in Wolfville, there are 2 constables that are ready to respond to priority 1 calls for service, right? So out of their day, only statistically 5% of the time, right, would they be tied up on any other call that they would immediately be available to respond.
So 5% of our calls are priority 1.
No, that's not a,
So that's not considered,
No,
okay.
no.
What type of?
No.
So what percentage of both those calls, what percentage is priority 1? Because we don't have that.
Yeah, it's definitely data that's available. It just doesn't form part of the GDPRM because the GDPRM is just as strictly concerned with workload. So again, it's definitely data that we could get to you. It's easily something that we could pull. It's not something that feeds into the results of the GDPRM.
So we do get that there's the police report. Is it labeled as priority 1? No. It's not labeled that way.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm understanding better now is that this is about the availability of the resource.
Correct.
This is not about the type of issue, the type of call. This isn't from the local perspective in terms of that what happens. This is in terms of your preparation to this.
basically what you have and how available they are based on how busy they are, essentially, is the.
Because if we're breaking down priority 1 calls as well as, like, say we take into account an aggravated assault where someone's been hit with a baseball bat. That came in right now, that would be considered a priority 1 call, right? And then we're going to respond to that. But we could also have that exact same call, that was a time delay of last week. Where they're saying somebody was assaulted with a baseball bat. It is an aggravated assault, but it happened a week ago. So for response time, we're not gonna rush in our cars and drive lights and sirens, right? Because we have happened in the past. we have a lot of time to follow up on that, we're gonna act accordingly. So
It's
you-
still just as serious an investigation that we're gonna spend just as much of our time on, but we don't need to go screaming out the door to it because.
So that specific priority one is just into how we're responding to that call at the time. Yeah, so and it's hard to break it down between calls because one call, if it's in progress and it's a life-threatening call, you need to respond to that immediately. But it could be the exact same call if there's a time delay or there's no life-threatening, where we're not gonna need to respond in a priority one manner.
You could very easily have an aggravated assault that's a priority 3. Right, if it happened a week ago.
Even the very worst calls could be priority 3 if we don't know about them when they're occurring. Yeah. And the reverse can be true too. We
Yeah.
sometimes go priority 1 to something if we don't have enough information. If somebody calls us screaming and can't get much information across but the dispatcher believes that a critical incident is occurring, we're forced to, I shouldn't say forced, but we have to treat that as a possibility of life and danger if someone's just screaming into the phone sort of thing. So we go tearing there as fast as we can, and it turns out that they're just very, very upset about something, but it doesn't mean maybe it's an assault or it's something, a dispute that they thought was going to become an assault or something like that. And so we go lights and sirens priority 1, but we get there and it doesn't end up being a very serious offense at the end of the day.
Because there was a case a few years ago where a pedestrian, spotted a woman like this at a table in the window. And there was red around. So they called the report.
Priority 1. Yeah.
She sound asleep with the red scarf.
There you go. And there are cases exactly like that where we're dispatching to a priority 1 immediate call, and then halfway there, they're like, okay, everyone just relax.
And I can tell you, yeah, and I can tell you
Yeah.
every police officer, every police officer with any kind of experience can tell stories from either side of the spectrum, especially some of us that have been in northern postings or isolated posts where sometimes, unfortunately, people who've experienced a lot of trauma in their lives, they don't maybe have that panicked reaction to a very serious call. So we might go to something that comes across as very minor and we get there and we go, oh my God, why didn't you call 911? That sort of thing. And then we get everything in between. So yeah. Okay. We're gonna go on to one of the notes here. So, sorry, go ahead, Dick. No, you're up.
I was gonna say this is going back to the example detachment from my overview. And basically what we're just gonna go through is so Wolfville's calls for service happen outside of what we would consider a normal occurrence time. So if Ed overlays that same blue bar that represents those 8 to 10 p.m., you can see how much of the orange and how much of the red disappears. And it's mostly just greens and a little bit of yellow. So if you compare that to what you just saw for Wolfville, when we're talking about that proactive time between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m., a lot of Wolfville's work is happening outside of those proactive 4 hours.
So in our average detachment across Canada, our police officers are not very busy in those down hours, in those 10 p.m. till 7:59 a.m. kind of hours. They're not as busy. So that's yeah. Any other points that we want to make about that previous slide? No? Okay. All right. So this is simulation number 2. So David completed a second simulation to demonstrate the impact that would be had if Wolfville were to leave the King's district model and operate as a standalone detachment, providing the same level of service. So the first simulation, which is our current model as we stand today, used 8 general duty members only because if a Wolfville member was not available, a district resource would respond if needed. From a GDPRM perspective, this meant that the number of members available to respond did not change due to Wolfville members not being available. In a standalone model, if a Wolfville member was not available, additional resources would be required. If Wolfville were to operate in a standalone model with the same level of service offered today, 3 additional general duty members would be required because Wolfville's actual GDYA was 1,588 hours out of 2,000 of that full 2,087.4. So when we talked about training, leave, sickness, medical time off, that kind of thing. When you averaged it out across the 8 Wolfville members, you got that availability. They were available. They were working about available for general duty calls, 1,588 hours each on average. So that means that to bring up the average to 2,087 hours, you would need 3 additional police officers.
Think of when you think about that schedule with the 2 members working 2 days, 2 nights, if one of those members calls in sick and you don't have a district resource that's available to respond in their place, it means that you have to have another additional resource in Wolfville that's able to respond if that person called in sick, or if the person's going on vacation, or if that person has a training course. So that's, and I know the GDYA gets a little bit confusing, but in the current district model, there is no GDYA because there's a backfill that's coming from the King's district. If Wolfville were to go to a standalone detachment model, they would have to supply their own backup because the Kings District resourcing would no longer be available. And when we say that the Wolfville's actual GDYA was 1,588, so every time a member calls in sick, every time a member goes on training, every time a member takes their leave, it's all put into our human resource system. And I went through every single report out of that system for every member in Wolfville. So when we say the GDYA was 1,588, that's based on the actual data. So I am looking at Travis's leave summary. I know when Travis called in sick. I know when Travis went on vacation. I know when Travis took a training course, and it's all factored into that GDYA. So current district model, there's no GDYA because there's a backfill of district resources. But in this second simulation as a standalone model where Wolfville would have to offset their own detractors, their actual leave detractors for Wolfville was 1,588 to go to 2,087.
Two things. First of all, with the current structure, there are, you're paying for 8, there may not be 8 people here.
Yes.
That's one thing. The other thing is, our 2 officers are not always in Wolfville, they could be somewhere in these counties. So it seems to me that there is an impact on these counties if Wolfville going by itself. I'm also wondering if you factored in if Wolfville was by itself and if always had 8, which we have to understand, we're more likely to get our complement filled than we have been so far.
The complement would be filled, but they would still have leave. They would still have, yeah. You always have 8 available, no, you always have those 2 available day in, day out, 24 hours a day. There's always going to be members available to respond to Wolfville calls. Yep.
And right now, the reality is that there's only 45. I know there's not 6, but whatever number is
Yeah.
not full. So if Wolfville is always going to have 2, that means that somebody in Berwick or King that is supposed to have for many days are not having them if Wolfville has 2.
So
That's correct. Yeah.
the reality is that there's a give and take there. Absolutely. That if, so there are some, yes.
Yeah, it will, a district resource calling in sick or going on vacation or taking training would cause a detractor to the district. It doesn't necessarily cause a detractor to Wolfville specifically.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It might, depending on if there was a higher.
It's, yes, Wolfville pays for the 2 constable positions that are general duty response. So regardless, there's always going to be 2 general duty positions available that are assigned to Wolfville. You might run into a situation where if there's 7 members on a watch and there's 6 priority calls coming in, it's got 6 members tied up and you need that second one in Wolfville, then yeah, there may be a time where there's a member not available in Wolfville. But from a GDPRM perspective, it's really looking at how many resources are available at any given time of day. And that's where that GDYA factor doesn't change because of that backfill of district positions.
But I think someone asked this question, but we don't have anything for Wolfville is what percentage of Lakeville, fall into those? Only one is the highest?
Priority one.
Minimum.
Yeah.
Whatever the most serious one, where you can't.
Yeah.
You don't know how much. But we just do the, you haven't told us what percent.
Correct, because yeah.
80% is used in most of the news. And,
There we go. Yeah.
The information's, as I said, the information's available. The GDPRM is concerned with workload, not the levels of priority. So like I said, it's available, just it doesn't play into the GDPRM specifically.
it was me who asked that question at the meeting, and we were actually told, no, that information is not available.
I could,
That said, we could not find out how, when Wolfville was called out of Wolfville. So if Travis got called out of Wolfville,
Yeah.
they could not tell us what that information.
Oh, those are two different things. though.
Yeah.
The percentage of calls in Wolfville that are priority one, that's a very different thing than the amount of time that a Wolfville member spends it. No.
How many are? How many
Uh.
times would we be at a disadvantage if Travis was, and Travis, but we're not in Wolfville and we have a priority one?
Well,
Because it's mostly priority three.
it's certainly mostly is priority three. I can't give you specific numbers, but if we go back to I'm thinking we could maybe go back to the percentages of calls, because I can tell you I can't tell you absolutely which of those would be a priority one response, but we could tell you which the more serious ones are, like the assaults, for example. The assaults that we showed you, like the number of assault calls, they didn't make the top 10 number of occurrences, so they're a fairly low number, but they certainly stand a much higher chance of requiring a level one response than a bylaw infraction, or like a parking ticket. None of those parking tickets that make up the most calls in Wolfville are priority ones. We're never going to go priority one to a parking violation, but
the priority three calls in general for all of, not just Wolfville, but all of Nova Scotia. Priority three is probably represent about 60% of all calls for service.
Any idea what priority one would be?
It was
Somewhere
around
between
7 to 9%.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that would be roughly indicative. He thinks about 7 to 9% as a provincial average are priority ones. And I would imagine that both those numbers are somewhere pretty close to that. I can't imagine there'd be any big outliers there, because the times that we respond to things are skewed by the student population doesn't mean that they're not reporting the same type or not involved in the same types of incidents. Yeah.
I know that I'm presenting at the police advisory board meeting next week as well, so I can comb the data for the last quarter and go through some files and give you maybe a more clearer picture of what you're asking as well. Yeah, that's right, and that's. Yes. So basically, all I would need to do is I would go into each file and then determine if, depending on that specific file, if the priority one response was needed. Right?
The dispatching system keeps track of it. Like as long as I don't want to speak out of turn, because I just want to make sure that we're okay to release the information. But as long as the information is releasable, I could have the answer in 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the difference is then that we don't pay for 8, Wolfville doesn't pay for 8 positions. Specifically pays for 8 people, and they're named.
Mhm.
So the benefit of the district model is we get to take other people and not, like, it's not 8 positions.
It's
There's
no, it's
specific people, because if they're gone somewhere else or on vacation, we're saying, if we were standalone, we would be out them. And if with the district model,
Standalone,
We get it.
essentially, you have those 8 and in order for them to ever be sick or take time off, if you wanted to keep 24-hour policing, yeah, you'd need additional people to backfill because King's District wouldn't be automatically backfilling because they wouldn't, as per the give and take, and I'll get into that a little more, they wouldn't have those 8 Wolfville members to assist with when the New Minas members, for example, need training or something like that. So just as a very simple example, say today, and I think you said that both members are here today, both Wolfville members are working. So today, that's what I'll use as my first example. So today, there's 2 Wolfville members working. And so if Travis is there, our team leader, their watch commander, and he's presented with a leave request from a New Minas member. A New Minas member wants to take the day off. He looks and he says, okay, I've got my 2 Wolfville people. I've got, so you've got 7 total. I've got 5, my other 5 right now are on the board. One of them wants to take the day off. So I'll go down to 6 total from 7 for the day, not the end of the world. And so he allows that. So then that's part of the give. So those 2 Wolfville members may be needed to respond to a call in New Minas if the New Minas members are busy with something else. Tomorrow, the Wolfville member wants the day off. So he gives that Wolfville member the day off because he's got all 5 or he's got 4 in New Minas, X number that can cover the calls here. So one day the 2 Wolfville members are working, and yes, they don't respond to everything here, but they respond to most things here because everything being equal, if a call comes in for Wolfville, those 2 Wolfville members will take it if they're available. If they're not, because one is sick tomorrow or because they're busy with something, then a New Minas member will take it, but they make the effort to. So that's the kind of give and take. We'll get into this now with our next simulations, but if you're standalone and those members are available elsewhere.
Billing is actually, given the CJ bills. But on top of that, you're gonna get into the give and take of it, but you had already mentioned something about how you're kind of pulling from Kings and Berwick resources, you have the district model, but the give and take is really important here. So if you were to go back to that map where you saw that between 8 and 10 on an average, for an average detachment, there's not a lot of calls. Let's say that's Kings. So you may see more Wolfville members attending calls in Kings during that day, but on the flip side, you have these members helping out with there's 5 or 6 member responses for the parties. So that gives you some really important there. So although it looks like Wolfville's getting really good deal if you're like putting those additional resources and backfilling, it's that give and take because there's additional resources when they're working.
Because Berwick, Berwick, Kingston, New Minas, those are not university towns. So their numbers, their heat map, if you will look a lot more like that average. So their members are not as busy their town is not as in need of police at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, like Wolfville is. So
to give you an exact, well, like these last 2 weekends, Friday and Saturday, I had in the hours of 11 and 2, 3 a.m. all 6 members under my command in Wolfville for those times.
everybody was here for that surge capacity I was talking about when things go crazy. Yeah.
There was one of the things I looked at when I was going through the 2022 data was how many members were needed per call. And there was I remember one specific file in Wolfville. It was in September, but it was a 13-member response. So it took all 7 GD members. It took the corporal, it took the sergeant. They brought in resources from Annapolis County. They brought in resources from West Hants County to respond to a Wolfville complaint. So I was trying to keep. I'm glad we opened up the conversation. It does come up a little bit later on in the next few simulations, but the reality is multi-member responses in Wolfville is something that's probably happened more, I would say, than in other municipalities. So being part of that district model allows for that surge, like Travis mentioned there, like being able to put 5 or 6 resources in because of a university party is something that Wolfville really benefits from the district model. So you might lose a Wolfville member at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because they're responding to calls for service in New Minas. But at 1 in the morning, when you need 6 members in Wolfville because of a university party, there are 6 members available.
They're automatically there because Travis is their boss and he tells them to be here.
And
And
again, like we don't want to
Yeah.
get too bogged down with what's party 1, party 2, party 3, because again, a university party. So remember, priority 1 for us is immediate and urgent response because there's a threat of a loss of life. That's not going to happen with a university party. So a university party, everything has a small percentage.
we don't believe that it's imminent, you know.
And a university party could initially come in as a noise complaint. A noise complaint could come in as a priority 3. So again, like, don't get bogged down on what's a priority 1, what's a priority 2, because the members operationally are always going to determine the amount of response required.
And obviously, as evidenced by that one particular file that Dave's talking about, where Annapolis and West Hants members responded, leaving the district model doesn't mean that in no circumstances will outside members respond. Of course they will. If there is an absolute crisis, we will assist West Hants just as they'll assist us. However, that day-to-day ability to surge in advance or to cover in advance is gone because Travis doesn't command the West Hants members, you know what I mean? And if Wolfville, if Travis is your Wolfville corporal, he doesn't command the King's members anymore. He's not in charge of them and he doesn't allocate their resources. So you'd be seeing that assistance from other districts only in those, that automatic assistance wouldn't be there, or only be there in those absolute priority emergency situations, the worst of the worst. Essentially.
Like mutual aid, fire department.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so I had a question.
Yes, please, Councilor Riley, sorry. Oh,
It feels different than what we were told.
I'm sorry, hold.
It feels different that those of us on, seems a bit different than my recollection of what we were told. Being that, and there are benefits to Wolfville having a embedded police department, but that we could social. And I didn't understand that just in emergency.
Yeah, I don't know, somehow, and maybe because it's coming from a different perspective, where you work it, and you live this every day, where I think some of the delivery we got was from justice and all of those other different levels. Maybe it's just more relatable. I'm just trying to figure out why it feels different this time, and I can't quite put my finger on exactly why.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, not being privy to what you were told, I'm just difficult to answer.
And maybe just out my understanding of it too,
I mean,
the way it
had that.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it was never really clear or justified the benefits of this. Because it happened at an operational level in 2012. Many times it was questioned, kind of explained to us why it was to a benefit. Because even though we're moving through direct contact, really those things. So there's some wind stuff. It was never really demonstrated. And when we did a GDPRM in 2016, none of us can even remember because no one came to council with it. It was not in depth. There was no explanation as to how it was calculated. And so it was just like, it's to your benefit. And I think that didn't resonate well because we weren't getting the good data. It was more anecdotal that we were hearing from our community, but response times were lagging or, so I think having this information presented in this way is the first time to really see clarity, because even as part of the policing review process, the first step was to have a presentation from the RCMP around Wolfville, and it wasn't anything like this. So I'm really glad that we did this because it does give us a lot more effort.
And I know we've all talked about, obviously I can't speak to meetings prior, but we all talked about transparency being important there. Like, no one's gonna try to hide the fact that obviously there's give and take. There's both, because yes, if if your members are tied up with a priority during those peak hours that aren't as busy here, and somebody calls in a theft in Wolfville, they might have to wait 90 minutes for us. But you know, the take is that at 2 o'clock in the morning, they've got 6 police cars patrolling to make sure that nobody's gonna be smashing the windows out of all the businesses downtown, or no one's gonna, you know. Obviously, worst case scenario, we, on the Saturdays, two Saturdays ago, we saw a couple scenarios where harm could certainly have come to people had we not been around in numbers. There was one case at least where I'm quite confident that a young person would have come to harm if there hadn't been 6 police cars rolling around and found that person before someone else did, sort of thing.
Yes, and you can find examples. The day is very small, has a very small detachment, very small population. So on the weekend, I'm sure you're all aware, fishing industry, just like Christmas, that happens every day. They have a peaceful meeting on board, an hour later, there's confrontation, doesn't know. Within 20 minutes, we had 8 vehicles there being drawn from each other attachments in the area. It's important for you to know that the district has a business continuity plan, every attachment has a business continuity plan. Part of that plan is if we're down members in one area because of contingency, if your building here catches fire and burns to the ground, there's a contingency plan for them to probably work out to miners. So there's always a backup. Having worked with floods, having worked with wildfire, you draw on those resources on that. So yes, you may lose some for a short period of time, but we've done, especially with the university. We all know things are more complicated. We always think about university learning and stuff. Those resources are available to you. Back when Bridgewater had an officer that was stabbed, and that individual took off for 3 days. We were brought in to help Bridgewater police because we could. With that comes what we call the routine. You have your team, crisis negotiators, and that's just part of the service. Back when we talked with the numbers here, back 30 years ago, we had 11 members. Chief, and you had 10 together per time. I think there's a reason why municipalities, they talk about having police, talk about going back to the model that they do, with the pressures, draws. One of the big things that we used to look at was, well, if we go back to one police, we have control them, yes, but the big draw that was we save money. That's gone. People around par with us, if not making more. The availability of us do a better job, I think, is with the district model. Not for both, but this is and then switch over to the years and become. So really, when you look at these numbers, the bang for your buck is with the district. I firmly believe.
The GDPRM, like the results are obvious and support the same thing.
And
Yes.
yeah,
We got this staff, and, you know, we look at the different models now that show what happens, district model, if you add a particular officer. It was the first time that it was clear to me, to value our.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of this, we should release recommendations.
Yep. Yeah, there will.
Get to those slides, you know,
Mhm.
those,
yeah.
because I was probably one of those folks, you know, really question, you know, what's our best practice?
Yeah.
Is it something that we recommend to
Mhm.
do it? Hopefully that full piece, or at least have oversight, comes with the NPSA, but looking at the district model, this was really our.
Yeah, and we're nearing that finale there now, so.
Before we move on, Wendy, you had a question.
Oh, I'm Very sorry, Wendy.
Not to push anything, but back in 2000, when local went from its own course to RCMP, the model that was in place had a sergeant in the detachment all day long. And I thought that worked best, just as being the local reporter at the time. And then we went to the district model and the oversight moved to mines. And it didn't seem like the community was factored in. So I just wondered if you could speak to whatever that model was, and probably all of you know, in place in 2021.
Can tell you right now, Counselor Elliott, that within an hour of landing in, well, my first visit to Wolfville, I had heard that issue. It's definitely front of mind for many people here, and we've had Aaron and I and a bunch of I've had discussions with a number of folks about that very thing, about having a supervisor, a face here, not a detachment commander under the district model, but a local NCO supervisor to be a point of contact. And we've had a lot of discussions with that, and there's a plan in the works, put it that way. I can't commit to anything quite as yet, but there's been a bunch of discussions, and we're making headway on a plan that I think will address that. It may not specifically be a sergeant back here. It'll be an NCO and a supervisor. And that's the thought. It's not, I can't commit absolutely to it yet, but there's a fairly advanced strategy in place to address that. And in the interim, we've been doing our best. I know that Travis, when he was acting as our senior ops NCO, endeavored to spend a fair bit of his week sitting here in Wolfville, and it was very well received. And I think that, so we're making efforts to do it informally until we can put something formally in place. And there's talk about how to make that work within the district model, basically reorganization of resources. But as Paul mentioned, it's a big machine, so there's a fair bit of work to do to check all the boxes to make that happen. But it's front of mind for me, and it's in process. We can discuss further down the road. Anything to add? Okay, so let's get into some more about simulation number 2. So currently, Wolfville general duty members are supervised by 4 corporals, and that funding comes from the County of Kings, which we discussed earlier. Those 4 corporals are not paid, so that's part of the give and take. So the sergeant doesn't sit here right now, but there's a fair chunk of the time of 4 corporals that are given to supervising those members. The RCMP organization and classification team was consulted to determine how many supervisors would be required to get to 11 general duty constables. Because on the last slide, that was a while ago, but on the last slide, we explained that because of that 1,500 and something hour, availability, we would have to add 3 constables to get to a healthy number of constables that we could safely staff 24 hours a day with 2 members here in Wolfville.
In a standalone model.
In a standalone model. So, and there'd be 1 public service employee as well, of course, or like a detachment assistant. So if Wolfville were moved to a standalone detachment model, 2 corporals would be required for direct supervision. A sergeant would still be required for supervision of those resources. So additionally, a staff sergeant would be required as the OIC. So if I was tomorrow to become the boss of Wolfville, it'd be at the same rank, so yes, it would be someone of my rank. And they'd have a sergeant underneath them at 2 corporals and 11 constables. So you're looking at a fairly significant increase in complement to run a safe, effective 24-hour policing, and you'd have those 2 members available to respond to calls at all times. Just to touch on that really briefly, I meant to, when in the midst of the discussion on the last one, I was going to make the point, an easy way to simplest way I can come up with of explaining the relationship that would exist between a standalone detachment and Kings District separate, if that was to happen, would be for me to look at our relationship right now with KPS, with the Kemptville Police Service. So if the chief is retiring now, I believe, but if Deputy Chief Marty, I'm trying to think of Marty's last name, Deputy Chief Smith calls me today and says, Ed, I've got an emergency in Kemptville. We've only got 2 police officers working today. We suddenly realized that there's this big protest or big event going on. Can you help? Absolutely. I'm going to send him if I've got the resources, I'm going to send him a couple to assist. But if he calls me and says, Ed, I've got a member calling in sick tomorrow, can you backfill me for the day? I'm gonna say, sorry, Marty, you're standalone. You can't, you're a separate police force. I can't do that. So that's and the exact same relationship exists with me and the detachment commander in West Hants, for example, exact same thing. So that's a simplification, I think, of how we look at that. So this would increase the total. So to go to this model, like I just said, the staff sergeant, 2 corporals, 11 constables, would increase the total funded member positions required in standalone model from 9 to 14. I have worked, my first post was basically that detachment, and it was functional, absolutely. But I will tell you that I think the district model works better, and
And that's the funding the 14 members would get you to a point where you have 2 members available at any given time. During university parties, unless they're pre-planned and you'd be able to schedule overtime, you would have 2 members available. So those Friday nights, those unexpected Friday nights where you need 6, that wouldn't be an option in a district or in a standalone detachment model unless you could pre-plan it and schedule overtime.
yeah, if Travis was your on-duty supervisor that same Saturday night in the standalone model, and he called me and he said, Ed, I need 4 of your members to come drive around. I'm the Kings District commander still. He calls me and he says, I need 4 of your members to drive around proactively in Wolfville. I'm probably gonna have to say, sorry, but you gotta use your own resources for that because we need ours. You know what I mean? That's the kind of loss of give and take. So, oh, absolutely. In critical, unexpected circumstances, but for day-to-day operations, proactive work, no.
Kentville Police can also assist us if needed as well. It's a give and take relationship both ways.
Yeah, but it's more in those unusual circumstances. There's no day-to-day backfill, day-to-day proactive patrols. Like, the deputy chief there doesn't call me when he's down to 2 members for the day and he doesn't think that he can do as much, I don't know, like patrol party sites that night, if he expects parties, things like that. But we will certainly back each other up in emergencies, which would be the very same if Wolfville operated as a standalone.
What would be the advantage of why would people do it? Why would they do it?
That I can't tell you.
They always had. It doesn't make sense to me. 50 more people in this town and suddenly we're forced to pay more for the model, but no more services. I understood the standalone, we would have more control. It's not a small thing that this summer, for the first time, in this council for 11 years, police officers know who I am. Please find out on the street, I go right up. Something happened this summer, I don't know if it's Travis, the neighbor, but it wasn't Travis who said hello to me. So one of the things that I was really looking forward to, the non-district model, that we would actually have conversations, we actually know who is next door. We actually know who's on the street. You're saying that doesn't work for us.
No.
And because we've got 50 more people, we're gonna pay a lot more. It doesn't make sense.
Let's not conflate the district model with the change of practice and administrative function that's outlined in the contract.
They do go together. It's forced us into a situation with the promise of something better, and yet what I'm hearing today, something better doesn't exist.
But you could remain in PSA when there was an option to remain as a PSA.
Oh, yeah.
And you can still, in either circumstance, choose the district model or the standalone model.
But I don't understand, no better service or money.
In the spirit of, like I said, my goal from the beginning since I got here at the end of March has been to be as, to remove some of that, that's veil, not saying there's a veil. I'm trying to be, as clear as I can about the positives and negatives. There are positives to a standalone. There are positives to There are positives to municipal police force in that there's no changeover. And some communities like that there's no changeover, that they get those same police officers for their whole lives. That, you know, or for their whole careers, I should say, that they know, and that they know the mayor's name and they know everybody's name. But, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to do with district versus standalone, because the RCMP would still, in a detachment standalone model, would still have that changeover every so many years. But I think there's a lot of positives to that too. You don't, you know, you get police officers with a variety of experience from all over the country that have seen different things. And yes, there's the trade-off that for the first couple of years here, they're not going to know everybody's name. And once they do, they're getting close to transfer time. But they also have there's a lot of positives there, because they often bring a wealth of experience from other places. And you get that changeover. So, and I'm not by any means suggesting that any of these things are automatic with a small time police force, but you avoid some of those connections that people build over the years, that, you know, they're policing their neighbors, the kids they went to school with, all those things. We can't ignore the fact that there's always those, you know, we're all humans, police officers included, and those, you know, bonds, for better or worse, are going to be much stronger in a municipal police force without any turnover. So that's, you know, yes, there are some benefits. You get the sergeant that you've known for 30 years. But it can be a negative too. And I have seen that firsthand. Not here. Yeah.
Is that history, that predictable reactism?
Yeah. And I can.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When Pat started talking about the presence, I mean, I understand the need for this building, because I think it makes people feel secure if they know there's a place where they can go for immediate help. I don't know that it has to always be this person,
Yeah.
or, you know, if it's necessarily that familiarity. It's the familiarity with the process, it's the security of knowing where to go. That you will be met with assistance, or at least something, with a person. Because I think some people guts, just an empty office, it suggests where is that sort of.
Yeah.
How do I get it? And
Yeah.
It makes people feel less secure.
Yeah.
But I'm not so sure it needs to be
The same person over and over. And that's been part of our discussions.
No, but I think explore further.
Yeah.
What-
And I
what
think
is the
we're
purpose?
well down that road of trying to establish a constant supervisory type presence, for sure. Sorry,
Yeah,
Aaron.
I know what's here and Aaron's comments were, but it is frustrating that they're under a contract with definition. Exclude counties, for example, so when we hit the population threshold, and those additional costs for accommodations and full cost of and so forth are on us, but not necessarily the like this all in that definition. I think those are some things that the potential bring forward. Not there. But I do think that's moving towards the PSA will give council a bit more control if they were looking for in terms of access to information and having more discussions with the folks that are in the community. But I think this has been really helpful for me to kind of see, okay, the status quo, let's understand status quo. But frankly, I didn't really before, versus, okay, if we were to stand alone and 14 resources, the same level of service, that's a decision from council if you want to pay for another 4 or 5 positions to have status quo, or is there different ways that we can complement the officer complement that we have? So this was, I know it's a computer modeled exercise and it's not the be all end all, but for me it was a really good eye opener. working.
Yeah.
And we've been really fortunate because since both of these gentlemen have come in, we've seen a huge improvement in just the interaction with our staff, with compliance, with, you know, foot patrols and presence. And I think we can build in some mechanisms that transcend the people. So having an NCO dedicated to Wolfville or just building in our expectations through the implementation process, hopefully they'll transcend the people. I hope we will stay.
Well, thank you very much.
You know, because
But that's,
experiences of how these people.
thank you. And yes, I think that we certainly can build towards transcending that those, you know, the people exactly, that we can put processes in place where we can work towards that for sure. And just very quickly, part of what I talked about transparency, that Travis and I have tried over the summer to take that approach with Wolfville members too. I think that might be part of what you're seeing, Madam Mayor, is that, we have taken steps to ensure that the Wolfville members have a better idea of what goes on in these meetings too. And they get what's expected of them. They have a better idea of what's happening in the future and what you folks want of them. And we've explained that, you know, downtown foot patrols and things like that are critical. And we share some more information from some of these meetings, maybe than they've had in recent times. I think that's maybe helped a little bit too. We're trying to put the transparency both ways, is to involve the frontline general duty members a little bit more and giving them a little bit more ownership of what's going on in the community as well. I think that's maybe helping. Was there a point here or a question? Yes, sir.
In terms of the existing.
Mhm.
Enhanced service dogs. That bill all went off, or that part of the. And that's question one. Question two is, how would that change?
Go ahead. You're on.
There's a permit release. Also sessions. Same is currently saying more municipal. We're going to municipal contracts as well, and PSAs. So as it stands now, that was.
So if you need the ERT team once in Wolfville throughout the year, it doesn't cost you anything. If you need the ERT team, the emergency response team 50 times throughout the year, it doesn't cost you anymore. If you need them 100 times, it doesn't cost you anymore. Those centralized services, those specialty services, they're not charged directly back to the municipalities.
Okay. So we're gonna
Quickly
move
go
on
through
with-
simulation
we'll
number
quickly
3.
go through number 3. So simulations were completed to show the results of a variety of different scenarios, including adjusting resource levels and availability hours. Reducing the hours of one detachment's availability while in a district model is not operationally feasible, as the responsibility of responding to calls would be placed on members from Numanus or Kingston. So in a nutshell, what that means is I couldn't, if we're still in the district model, I couldn't switch Wolfville to be on call, Wolfville members to be on call from 4 AM to 8 AM, for example, because no member in Numanus is going to listen to a call coming in for within their district and wait. Like if somebody, for example, is calling in an emergency, it wouldn't be fair to my people in Numanus, because if they hear an emergency call in, they're not going to wait for the 2 on-call Wolfville members to get out of bed, put a uniform on and go. They're going to respond. So it wouldn't be fair to put one unit on call within the district and leave the other ones on a 24-hour model, basically, is what that means. Therefore, any simulations shown with reduced hours will run as if Wolfville were a standalone detachment, which includes not having immediate access to district resources. Simulations were run for the average week and the busiest week by workload over the last year, right? To show the effects adjusting resource and availability levels have. So this on the column on the left is how many members you would have here. So you can see how those numbers change drastically. So this is the average week, these 2 columns, and this is the busiest week of the year, these 2 columns. So 6 members, quite clearly, like that proactive time benchmark is what, 35%?
Yeah.
The minimum recommended minimum. So you'd be barely above that on an average week and you'd be 0% available on the busiest weeks. And as you move down through the column, so with 12 members available, you're looking at 70% proactive time, which is a little bit better than you've got now, and 38% in the busiest week. So 8 is the current, right? That's 8 available GD members. So yeah, on our busiest week, we drop, what's that, sorry?
That includes the GDYA, so.
Yes. Oh, that includes that.
Yeah, your status quo would be
Should be
more
11.
comparable to 11.
To 11,
Yeah,
that's
because it'd
right.
be 8 plus your
Yeah.
GDYA would be 11.
Yeah.
Well, this is based on the reason.
So
So that shows everything from 6 to 12.
So
So
these-
that's the results if you had 6 members working 18 hours, if you had
7 there,
members.
8 there, 9 there. 10.
The
No.
GDYA.
Yes, yes,
Yep.
it does. Yeah, sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would be basically 4 members working that watch rotation, so it would be
Or available.
1
obviously.
member at any given time, plus 2 additional members to cover off the GDYA.
So if
So-
we were, yeah, if it was standalone here right now, you need 11 to what you, to achieve that same coverage you have right now. So yeah, 11 would be the closest representation of what's happening in Wolfville right now. So, yeah. Yeah, so you can see like 12 would be getting well above, what's current and, for the proactive time on the busiest week, and it would still be well above the required or the recommended minimum on the busiest week.
When you change availability hours in the GDPRM, you're typically not changing busiest hours. So even though Wolfville's busiest hours are outside of those core proactive of 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., really the hours that we're adjusting here are 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. So the proactive availability is still going to come back a little bit high because there's not a ton of calls for service that are coming in between 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. The biggest difference that you're going to see when you start adjusting availability hours is in that priority 1% availability response. So Wolfville right now is 95.2, if I remember correctly. So you can see here that even with 12 members, your priority 1 availability average is only 86%. So you lose 10% priority 1% availability by reducing those hours.
This is the exact opposite of what we want. Priority 1 goes down,
Yep.
and we have no proactive time, so there's no proposals, there's no fund direction. None of the things that we basically that.
Correct.
So.
Same
Same
thing,
thing.
20 hours.
This is on call for members would be on call 4 hours a day. So in basically the wee hours of the morning, there'd be no police officers in uniform for 4 hours. They'd be at home, on call, available to respond. We call it operational operational response. Yeah. My bad. Oh, so they'd be ready to go, but there'd be that 15, 20, depending on where they live, that time where they throw a uniform on and drive to, the call sort of thing. So
From a GDPRM perspective, they are not available to respond to a call.
immediately,
which is
not immediately
Not
available.
immediately available, which is why that priority 1
Yeah.
percentage drops significantly when you start reducing the.
This is that
the availability.
downtime to tie their boots up and, get out of bed first of all. And yeah. So that's the same thing. We'll probably skip
Yep.
through this, and this is now we're going, oh, okay. I was thinking there was another hour. Okay. So now we're at the general conclusions. I'm gonna skip to that notes because I remember you had some great notes there. So under general conclusion, where am I looking here? Just going into this. Okay. So proactive availability at face value is high for members of Wolfville detachment. This is partly due to a larger than normal percentage of occurrences occurring outside of the proactive core time. We've talked about this, at a fair bit of length. So in a district model, there's give and take when it comes to policing within municipality limits. Because of this, Wolfville members may lose some availability during proactive core hours while responding to calls for service outside of Wolfville's town limits. This is balanced by having immediate access to additional resources during busy periods outside of the proactive core hours and during sudden and unexpected large-scale events that occur within Wolfville limits, like those parties that block off the streets, block off summer streets, sort of thing, that sort of thing. So if Wolfville were to move to a standalone detachment model, additional resources would be required in Wolfville to offset the loss of district resource availability. Although events, this is still in general conclusions, although events like Homecoming Week, Cheatin' Cup, and Touchdown Atlantic can be planned for in advance, unexpected events that require more than a 2-member response are a reality in Wolfville due to the large university demographic. And we've seen that even just in the last couple of weeks with school back in, we've seen that a couple of times. The potential negative impact of not having enough resources to respond to an unexpected large-scale event would have to be taken into consideration if Wolfville were to leave the district model and operate as a standalone detachment. A higher than normal percentage of calls for service outside of proactive core hours and the relationship Wolfville has with the rest of Kings District makes any availability coverage less than 24 hours difficult to.
So from all of that, so everything we've talked about today, essentially myself as a trained GDPRM analyst, so I give these conclusions, and this is just a summary of everything I've seen. That all leads to essentially recommendations. And I call them recommendations because I say, based off the results that I've seen, here's what I recommend we do. And that's really what we're taking and we're giving to the DPOs to say, like, based off the GDPRM results, here's some recommended changes we can make.
And I think it's safe to say, David, that you make these recommendations internally as well. Like, it's not like you were, you went into this expecting or knowing what recommendations are coming forward. Like, for example, you and I hadn't met until you were pretty much done this. So
that's correct. Yeah, no, it's yeah. So I started the Wolfville GDPRM back in March, and I think Ed and I met for the first time in June, maybe July. So there's a lot of background work that goes into these reports long before they ever get into the operational hands. But like I said, that's there's a lot of units in our headquarters that these are going through first. Like these recommendations, like, yes, they are my recommendations as the analyst, but they're not just hitting your guys' hands as my recommendations. These are going through our criminal operations teams. They're going through the detachment planners. They're going through that police resourcing methodology support unit that oversees the GDPRM. And they're all basically just saying, like, yep, we see what you're saying and we agree with these recommendations. So these aren't just Dave, the guy from headquarters. Yeah, Dave the analyst.
Dave the analyst. So recommendation number 1, it is recommended that Wolfville remain within the Kings District model. And although being part of the district model means that some of Wolfville's proactive time will be lost due to the requirement to respond to calls for service outside of the town, the unique aspects of general duty policing in Wolfville benefit from the immediate availability of additional resources when needed, district resources when needed, particularly because of the likelihood of large unplanned events that require a large resource response. The level of service provided today could not be sustained outside of a district model without an increase in established positions, as we've shown. And recommendation number 2 is, it is recommended that Wolfville maintains its current establishment of 9 members, 8 constables and a sergeant. 8 general duty members within the Kings District model allows for 2-member availability 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A decrease of even 1 position would force a change to the schedule to be made where this is no longer sustainable and will fill without additional district support. An increase in general duty establishment would lead to an increase in general duty response to Kings County as a whole, including Wolfville, but the additional resource would not respond to Wolfville calls for service in isolation. So that's the main sort of points there. And I will tell you that I came into this not obviously knowing the specifics of Kings District or Wolfville before I moved here at the end of March. And I've seen it as a whole, and I will be perfectly honest. I have worked in places where I did not think that a district model was sustainable or the correct response. It was other provinces, and it was places where the communities were further spread out. The travel distances were longer. There was less infrastructure. The infrastructure in place was not as good as it is in Kings District. The travel times, travel was more dangerous, and backup was a lot longer coming for the members than it would be here. And I protested fairly, vigorously against adopting district models in those places. But I will tell you very honestly that I think it is workable and the best response here. It is. We're in the valley here. The communities are close together relatively. The highways are good. The infrastructure is strong. The backup, I have not run into situations where members are placed in danger, our members, nor have I seen situations where I think the public is in any increased danger because of the fact that we're sharing resources over a bigger area. I certainly have seen that elsewhere, but I can tell you that in my experience, at least over 3 divisions and 6 posts now, is that it is workable and working here. And now I'm I'm open to any questions or, yeah, this is the end of the presentation, so. and-
As far as career trajectory for you guys, so you guys are, you're a constable, you're a sergeant, no, other way, no, you're a staff sergeant.
I'm staff sergeant.
You're
He's a
staff
corporal.
sergeant. So for you guys, like in the RCMP in general, how many constables, like what's next for you guys? And that's why they don't stay here and where we don't know them, because everybody's moving up, but I mean, that's the way it goes.
So
So you
it's-
guys are young guys, so.
We're essentially pyramid shaped.
Yeah.
You know, we have by far the most members are constables. And then there's a couple of thousand, I think, corporals in the RCMP, a little bit more than that, and then it tightens up to the top. We have one commissioner right from for the whole country, right? One commissioner of the RCMP. Staff sergeants is the highest of the non-commissioned officer ranks. So, and the number of people that a staff sergeant command is, you know, once you're in the NCOs, a corporal generally would only be in charge of a 3-person post sort of thing. A sergeant can usually handle up to about 15. A staff sergeant is a big jump to 50, 51, something like that. And then an inspector, so King's is an inspector level position. So
Oh, that's really what I'm getting at. So
normally it would be an inspector position. It is right now, but the inspector is off or retiring, so I'm acting one job above. Inspector is one bump up, but it would take a long time to explain it, but we have some holdovers from the military days, and that we have non-commissioned and commissioned officers, so there's a separation there, but the next rank up is a commissioned rank, and that's the inspector. And in terms of upward mobility, then it all depends on the people.
for you.
You probably think that Travis has a lot more years left in the force, but I still can't believe this myself. He's only 2 years younger than me.
But you're an officer too.
So I'm a non-commissioned officer. I'm acting in a role that would normally be filled by a commissioned officer of the RCMP, but I'm an NCO. And so, but I'm a police officer, yes. All our.
No, but you're an officer.
Myself?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, no, I'm a public service employee.
You're an employee. Okay.
He's a stat. He's a
Well, I thought, how does a cop get to be a
He's an analyst.
statistician? I was wondering. All right, so that's good to know. But the next is support for you guys. You're Kings County, and you talked about Hants West or Hants East. Going that way, where's your next detachment?
The next, going outside of,
Going west.
inside, okay, sorry. In Kings, we have Numinus, Wolfville, Kingston. Those are our 3 buildings. That's Kings District right now. The next district to the west of us is Annapolis County District.
Where are they there?
Bridgeton, Middleton.
And then
That's
going
their
this
2
way
buildings.
and then Halifax.
West Hants, no, to the other side is there's West Hants. So they have just, they've got, just the Windsor building. That's what I thought. They've just got that one building.
Don't forget the 8 kilometers of east stands before you hit.
Oh, I kind of forgot that. Yeah, there's 8 kilometers of East Hants down there for me.
Halifax, not that far away.
Halifax district is quite close, yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask like a total off-base question, but I've been asked it and I know it
Sure
could be
try.
done.
Why, how long do you keep your cars idling and can you not just start them really fast?
You would- Okay,
And I use my, my cousin, I'm.
believe me, I've got this question so many times. Okay, and I will clarify. So my father is a retired officer in the RCMP, and he did this for a very long time. He retired short, just as these computers that are in all of our police cars now are coming into play. And he has growled at me so many times, tell your people to shut those damn police cars off. When he's come to visit me at work, he gets upset. He did for a long time, and I've had to explain it to him a couple times, but the last time I went through it with him, I think he he understood. So that's the explanation I'm gonna give, because he's my toughest critic sometimes, so I'll explain it. So our police officers have become increasingly reliant on and our dispatchers too, on their MWS, their mobile workstation, the computer in the car. And those are powered directly by a battery that is charged by the engine. And they have lag times built into them, so if they're shut down for a short period of time, the battery will keep them powered, but eventually that battery, I think an hour, most times
Say if an hour.
it can be changed. I think
Temperature outside the ambient temperature
That-
as well.
affects things colder, they won't get as long.
It's not unlike it's essentially a fancy laptop that you can drive over if you want to. That's the
Yeah,
way
it's a-
I was told it was
it's
an MWS.
It's a toughened laptop.
It's a toughened laptop, but unlike any laptop, if you leave it unplugged for long enough, it's gonna run out of
And
battery.
we do put a large supplemental battery in the cars. Weight in police cars has always been an issue. Rollover, especially with the SUVs, we have to be concerned about. We have to try to mount the weight low. They do put a large supplemental battery to try to keep all those electronics running longer. However, eventually you reach a point, and I think it's safe to call it an average of about an hour, where the battery will lose. Actually, in some cases, it's more like a half hour. The battery will have, the computer will force the engine to, or, the battery will die, and the computer will lose connection if the engine's not running. So, yes, I wish there was a better solution and I'm thinking there's gotta be one out there, but we haven't gotten there yet. But the simple answer is, if the members turn their cars off and that battery dies on them, so they get tied up with something for a few minutes, and they can't get outside before the battery comes. When they get dispatched to a call, especially if it's one thing for a lower priority call, but for example, let's say I'm sitting in the police station, I've turned in the detachment, I've turned my computer off, and I've exited, I'm now outside that window, the battery is shut down, the computer, or the connection to the modem is lost. Travis is out on the road driving around, he says, Ed, I need you at X address right now, and have a look at my file for what I'm dealing with. I run out to my car, my battery's dead. I don't know the area very well yet. I might not even know exactly where he is. And I don't know exactly what he's dealing with. And it takes about minute, 2 minutes, if your computer hasn't shut off completely, takes a minute or two.
It's, and actually it can get up to like 15-20 minutes. to
Yes,
get
it
reconnected
can.
to the network.
You don't need to, you have all this technology, there's gotta be something.
We don't have it yet. That is a question for. Cause it bothers me too. It bothers me too, and I was a proponent of shutting off my car until a couple of times when I jumped in and couldn't back somebody up right away because I was. Yep, I agree.
I'll also note that here.
Yeah.
Should be by 2030, so it's gonna be the next decade. That should see not only administrative vehicles, but these package vehicles, being, zero emission.
Electric, yeah. And the last piece I'll add just to that is, so before my life as an analyst, I was one of these guys as dispatcher. So I worked in the Operation Communication Center, and my biggest concern with members turning their cars off and losing that MWS connectivity is how I can see where they are by GPS. So if it's 3 a.m. and a priority call comes in and Ed jumps in his car, it might take 5 to 15 minutes to boot up his computer, but his priority in that moment is not booting up his computer, it's responding to that call. As a dispatcher, for those 5 or 15 minutes until he gets his computer up and running, I cannot see where he is, which for him should be terrifying, and for me, it was definitely terrifying to know that I have a member out there at 3 o'clock in the morning responding to a priority call. It could be a weapons complaint, it could be somebody with a firearm, and I can't see where he is because his computer shut down.
So, yeah, there's lots of reasons we do it. Yeah. And when I came here, it bothered me at first more than it does now. It still bothers me. I think we should have a solution. I hope we are getting close to one. But it's bothered me less when I first got here because I came out of a northern post relatively northern in Labrador, where we didn't have MWS computers at all. Dispatchers never knew where we were. That was the reality for me. It's not the reality for the vast majority of our CMP members, and it shouldn't be the reality in a place like this where we only had 6 kilometers of road in Maine. If I got lost, then my backup is fine. Yeah. All else failed and name the guys could drive around and find. Not here.
Oh, question back
Oh, we
here.
got one last question, I think.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes and no. So it's taking a look at the total number of positions that are available. And it does take a deep dive into what we would call soft vacancies. So those leaves like ODS, or if it's maternity leave or things like that, a lot of that gets factored into consideration. It doesn't, the GDYA doesn't do a great job when it comes to determining hard vacancies. So just there physically isn't a person in that position until you reach a point where it's been vacated for a long time. Then when you're going through summaries and things like that, then you can kind of take that into consideration. But if you have short-term hard vacancies, they're not always captured in that GDYA.
Talk about the value of backing within the district of who that happened. And you're asking in statistics here, I do want to ask, are there numbers on the response rate to backfilling requests? To different, and another kind of aspect of the issue with the sell-off that falls over time.
Definitely not something I would have access to.
Are you speaking specifically to the amount of time it takes the staff? Or are you speaking to?
No, a different question. That's just, backfilling that you have that size, say they need. And because of the, benefit district model, that is one of the responsible. And it is very clear. I'm just wondering how fair is it to the current. How much did that respond to that? And then on top of that, how often is the cost of it?
There is a significant amount of overtime use, depending on vacancies, but yeah, there is some use for that, absolutely. The simplest or the easiest answer, the only absolutely definitive answer I can give, on short notice is that it depends on how big a pool you have. So the bigger the district, the bigger the pool of members, the easier it is to find somebody to, and the smaller the impact you get from one person calling in sick. You know what I mean? Like in a smaller district, one person calls in sick, it has a much bigger impact on operations, and you have a smaller pool of people to find backup from. In a fairly medium to large district like we have here, probably more on the large side, we have a bigger pool, so it's A, less of an impact to operations when one person calls in sick, and B, we have more people to look at, to look to fill that spot. So, but in terms of numbers, I certainly don't have easy access to.
And I would add to that, like overtime is tracked along the line perspective, like actually $1,000, but figuring out the time it takes to fill in the time where it's from, I don't think that's tracked. Perhaps districts track it, but the division.
Not. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, so what I'll do, in discussions there with Danielle, I'll figure out the best way to get you guys a copy of this. I do, like I said, I do have notes specifically for Ed in there that I want to make sure I just kind of go through first, but yeah, no, I'll make sure I get you guys